The briefcase hit this marble table like a verdict. Naomi Marcelli didn't flinch. She'd trained herself not to flinch. Not in the emergency room when a child coded, not when Roman came home at 3 a.m. with blood on his collar that wasn't his. But sitting alone at that long table, surrounded by the Marcelli family, like wolves arranged in their best jewelry, she felt something crack inside her chest that no amount of training could have prepared her for. Roman's mother slid the briefcase forward with two perfectly manicured fingers. "We're being generous," she said. "Most women in your position would understand that by now." The cash was stacked in neat bricks. The jewelry caught the chandelier light, and Naomi understood, with devastating clarity, that she had never been a daughter-in-law to these people. She had always been a problem waiting to be solved. Before we go any further, if this kind of story speaks to something in your heart, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. Stories like this one don't get told nearly enough. Hit that like button and drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The drive to the Marcelli estate took 40 minutes from the city, and Naomi spent most of it rehearsing what she would say. That was the thing nobody understood about being married to Roman Marcelli. You were always rehearsing. What to say when his mother called and asked pointed questions wrapped in pleasant tones. What to do with your face when his father made a remark at dinner that technically couldn't be called an insult, but somehow hollowed you out anyway. How to walk into rooms that weren't built for you and carry yourself like you belonged there, even when every person in the room was quietly voting otherwise. Naomi had been doing this for 3 years. She was good at it by now, uncomfortably good. She watched the iron gates open as her car approached, and she straightened her posture out of habit. Not vanity, just the kind of muscle memory that develops when you've spent enough time being watched and assessed and quietly found lacking. She was wearing a deep burgundy blazer she'd bought 6 months ago for exactly this kind of occasion. Something polished without trying too hard. Roman had told her once that she always looked beautiful. She believed him. She just wasn't sure his family agreed. The message had come 3 days earlier, handwritten on heavy cream stationery. The Marcelli family's preferred way of communicating anything they considered important. It was signed by Vittoria Marcelli, Roman's mother. "We would like to have you for lunch. Just family. It's time we got to know each other better, don't you think?" Naomi had read it 4 times. She'd stood at the kitchen counter in her scrubs, still smelling faintly of antiseptic from her shift, and she'd turned the card over in her fingers like it might say something different on the back. She'd texted Roman a photo of it. He'd responded in 12 seconds. "That's good, baby. Go. They're coming around." She wanted to believe him. She wanted that so badly. What she hadn't told Roman, what she'd carefully kept from him, was that this wasn't the first attempt. That 2 months earlier, his sister Camilla had met her for coffee and spent 45 minutes asking questions that sounded conversational but felt more like an intake interview. How much did she know about the family's business dealings? Did she ever ask Roman about money? What were her long-term plans, career-wise? Did she want children? Naomi had answered carefully and finished her coffee and said goodbye with a smile. And then she'd sat in her car in the parking garage for 10 minutes, with her hands gripping the steering wheel before she trusted herself to drive. She hadn't told Roman about that either. He had enough on his plate. He always had enough on his plate. And she'd convinced herself that saying nothing was a form of protection, that absorbing these things quietly was just what you did when you loved someone who was already carrying too much. She'd built a whole philosophy around it without realizing the philosophy was slowly eating her alive. The housekeeper met her at the door. Not warmly, but correctly, which was how things worked in the Marcelli estate. You were attended to precisely. You were addressed properly. And you were always made to feel, in ways too subtle to quote later, that your presence was a courtesy extended rather than a welcome genuinely given. Naomi was shown to the east dining room. She'd been in this house perhaps 15 times over 3 years of marriage, and she'd never once been taken to the east dining room. It was the formal one, the one with the long marble table that seated 20 and the oil portraits on the walls, and the kind of silence that seemed designed to make people feel small. She noticed that detail and filed it away, the way she filed away everything. Not with alarm, just with the quiet clinical attention she'd developed as a nurse. Notice, assess, don't react yet. She sat down. Nobody else was in the room yet. She placed her purse on the chair beside her and folded her hands on the table and waited. The room smelled like fresh flowers and furniture polish. The chandelier above her was the size of a small car. One of the portraits showed a man she recognized as Roman's grandfather, the one who'd built the empire, or at least the legitimate portion of it. He had Roman's jaw and his mother's eyes, cold and evaluating, and he seemed to be looking directly at Naomi in a way that made her want to move her chair. She didn't. Vittoria Marcelli entered first, followed by her husband Enzo, followed by Camilla. They came in together, which struck Naomi as staged, because everything about this family was staged. They sat across from her, all three of them, in a row, on the other side of the marble table. And something about that arrangement, that deliberate positioning, made Naomi's stomach drop a full 2 inches before she caught it and held herself steady. "Naomi," Vittoria smiled. She had the kind of smile that arrived on her face fully assembled, like it had been pressed there. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," Naomi smiled back. "It's good to see you." Camilla was looking at her blazer, not at her face. At her blazer, with a very specific kind of attention that communicated everything and said nothing. "Roman is still away?" Vittoria asked, already knowing the answer. "His meeting ran long. He'll be back tomorrow morning." "Yes." Enzo said this, just that, just yes. And the way he said it, leaning back slightly, arms crossing at the wrist, told Naomi that Roman being away was not an accident. It was a requirement. This lunch had been arranged for exactly this window, while Roman was out of the country, and she was alone, and there was nobody on this earth who would hear what was about to happen. She knew that in her body before she knew it in her mind. And still she sat there, because leaving would have meant admitting she was afraid, and Naomi had not survived 3 years of this family by letting them see her afraid. The housekeeper brought water, then wine she hadn't asked for, then a small plate of things to eat that nobody touched. The performance of normalcy stretched out for approximately 7 minutes, during which Vittoria asked Naomi polite questions about her work at the hospital, and Enzo stared at a point slightly above her head, and Camilla refilled her own wine glass. Then Vittoria reached beneath the table and placed a briefcase on the marble. It was black. Italian leather, by the look of it. The kind of case that cost more than Naomi's first car. Vittoria set it in front of her without ceremony and folded her hands on top of it, and the smile she'd been wearing since she entered the room finally fell away, because she didn't need it anymore. "We should speak directly," she said. "I'd appreciate that," Naomi said. She was proud of her voice. It came out completely even. "Roman has obligations," Vittoria began, "to this family, to our name, to the empire his grandfather built and his father maintained and that he will one day lead entirely. These obligations require, they have always required, a particular kind of woman standing beside him." "I see," Naomi said. "I don't think you do." Vittoria's voice wasn't cruel exactly. It was the tone of someone explaining something to a person they'd already decided was limited in their ability to understand. The Marcelli name carries weight in this city and in this country that you cannot fully appreciate because you didn't grow up inside it. That isn't a criticism. It's simply a fact. Roman's wife will be photographed alongside senators. She will host dinners for people whose names make governments nervous. She will carry our legacy into rooms where the wrong word, the wrong presence, the wrong impression can cost us everything we've built. She paused to let that land. "Roman loves you," Enzo said suddenly. He said it the way you'd present evidence in a trial, firmly, without warmth. "We're not disputing that. Roman has always been passionate about his choices. His choices. Like she was a car he'd bought in an impulsive mood. But love," Enzo continued, "is not a business plan." Naomi looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment, and inside she was doing the thing she always did, the nurse thing, the assessment thing, cataloging everything, storing it, keeping her breathing slow and her face still. Outside, she was perfectly calm. She had a gift for this. She sometimes hated that she had a gift for this. Vittoria unlatched the briefcase. The click of it was very loud in that marble room. Inside were bricks of cash arranged in clean rows, and beside the cash, a velvet tray holding jewelry, a diamond necklace, earrings, a bracelet that caught the chandelier light and threw it back in pieces. Naomi looked at it all. She let herself look, because looking was the honest response, and she wasn't going to perform shock she hadn't earned. $3 million, Vittoria said, and the jewelry is appraised at an additional $800,000. You would also retain the apartment in the city. Roman purchased it before the marriage, but we would transfer the deed to your name. You would be comfortable. You would be taken care of, and Roman would be free to fulfill his responsibilities to this family. Naomi was quiet. We want this to be civil, Camilla said. First time she'd spoken. Her voice was lighter than her mother's, practiced casual, the kind of tone that girls like her learned in boarding school as a way to deliver cuts without dirtying their hands. Roman doesn't need to know the details. You could simply tell him it didn't work, that you grew apart. People do. People do, Naomi agreed quietly. Something flickered across Camilla's face, confidence maybe, or the beginning of relief. And then Naomi pushed the briefcase back across the table. Not violently, not dramatically. She just placed both hands on the leather edge and slid it steadily back toward Vittoria until it sat between them like an uncrossed line. No, she said. The room went very, very still. No? Vittoria's voice was soft in a way that was not soft. No. Naomi's hands were flat on the table now. I don't want your money. I don't want the jewelry. I don't want to grow apart from my husband because it's more convenient for your family's image. You're not thinking clearly, Enzo said. I'm thinking more clearly than I've thought in a long time, actually. Camilla let out a short breath, but not quite a laugh, something sharper. $3 million isn't something people say no to. I just did. You'll regret this. Naomi looked at her. That might be true, she said, but I'd regret the other thing more. What she didn't say, what she kept folded tight against her chest, was that her hands were shaking under the table, that her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth, that some part of her, the exhausted part, the part that had been absorbing these people for 3 years without complaint, had looked at that briefcase for exactly 2 seconds and felt the seductive pull of it, the simplicity of it. Take the money. Walk away. Stop fighting to belong somewhere that has never wanted you. She'd felt it. She wasn't proud of it, but she'd felt it. And then she'd thought about Roman. Not Roman, the man who commanded rooms and made governments nervous. Roman at 2 a.m. with his head in his hands at the kitchen table, when he thought she was asleep, when he let himself be tired in the dark. Roman who called her from airport payphones when he couldn't risk his cell. Roman who had learned, specifically and carefully, how she liked her coffee and made it for her every morning without being asked, without making it a thing, just did it quietly, because that was how he loved her, in the small daily acts that nobody ever saw. That Roman. She'd thought about that Roman, and she'd slid the briefcase back across the table. Vittoria studied her. Something moved behind those cold eyes. Calculation, maybe. Or the decision to shift tactics, because this woman did not get where she was by accepting the first refusal. We know about your family, Vittoria said. And there it was. Naomi's breath didn't change. Her posture didn't change. But something inside her dropped very fast and landed hard. Your brother, Vittoria continued, her voice conversational now, terrifyingly conversational. Marcus. He has some outstanding issues that haven't yet attracted official attention. Your aunt in Georgia, the property she owns. There are some questions about the title that could become complicated very quickly if the right people looked into it. We've been thorough, Naomi. We've been very thorough. This was the moment she finally understood. The lunch invitation. The stationery. The careful handwriting. None of it was an olive branch. None of it was the family coming around the way Roman had hoped, the way she'd let herself half believe. This had been a strategy from the first word. A trap dressed up like a welcome. They weren't trying to get rid of her. They were trying to obliterate any reason she might have to stay. And somewhere in the house, somewhere close enough that the sound traveled through old stone walls and settled into the chest of a man who had not yet made his presence known, Roman Marcelli stood completely still and listened to his mother threaten his wife's family and felt something happen in the center of him that he would not be able to name for hours. He'd come home early. His meeting had ended the previous night. He'd taken a private flight back, planning to surprise her. Actually planning to surprise her, with the flowers he'd left in the car and the dinner reservation he hadn't told her about. He'd come through the side entrance because he liked to, because he grew up in this house, and the side entrance was habit, and he'd heard voices from the east dining room, and something in his gut, something old and well-calibrated, had made him stop before he entered. So he'd stood behind the stone wall, and he'd heard everything. He heard his mother describe Naomi as unsuitable. He heard his father reduce 3 years of marriage to a passion project gone on too long. He heard Camilla say, in that breezy, throwaway voice she'd had since she was 17, that Roman would tire of her eventually. He heard the briefcase. He heard the number. He heard Naomi say no. He heard Naomi say no. And then he heard his mother bring up Marcus. Heard the implication coiled inside those pleasant words like something venomous. He heard his wife's breathing, controlled, careful, the way she breathed in the hospital when something had gone wrong and she was the only one in the room who couldn't afford to fall apart. He had heard all of it, and Roman Marcelli stood there in the dark of his childhood home, flowers still in the car, dinner reservations still on his phone, and understood with a clarity that felt almost physical that he had failed his wife in a way that could not be undone. Only answered. Inside the dining room, Naomi was still sitting across from his family, alone, with no one to stand beside her. That was about to change. His hand found the door. The door didn't slam. That was the first thing that registered in the room, the absence of violence in how it opened. Roman Marcelli didn't throw it back against the wall, didn't enter the way men like him sometimes entered rooms when they were angry, with noise and the physical declaration of authority. He opened it the way he always opened doors, evenly, completely, and stepped through it with the particular stillness of someone who has already decided exactly what they are going to do. But the room knew. The room knew the moment he crossed the threshold. The housekeeper who had been standing near the far wall moved without being told, just quietly stepped sideways and then entirely out of the frame, the way people who work for dangerous men learn to do. Camilla's wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth and stayed there. Enzo's arms, which had been folded across his chest in that particular posture of authority he'd carried his whole adult life, came apart slowly, like something released under pressure. Vittoria Marcelli was the last to react, because Vittoria Marcelli had trained herself over 6 decades never to let anything show on her face before she was ready to show it. But even she went still. Roman's eyes went directly to Naomi, not to his mother, not to his father, not to the briefcase still sitting on the marble table with the velvet jewelry tray catching chandelier light. To his wife, sitting alone on her side of the table, with her hands flat on the surface, and her posture so correct it looked like it was costing her something. Naomi looked up at him. Her face did something complicated in that moment, relief and devastation arriving at exactly the same time, and underneath both of those things, something that looked very much like shame, and Roman recognized it, and the recognition went through him like something cold. She was ashamed that he'd seen this, not relieved that help had arrived, ashamed that she hadn't been able to keep it from him. He crossed the room without speaking and stood beside her chair and put his hand on her shoulder. Not gently, not like a comfort, with weight, with intention, with the kind of physical statement that people in rooms like this understood immediately. He stood there with his hand on her shoulder, and he looked at his family across the marble table, and the silence in the room became very loud. Roman! Vittoria's voice was measured, controlled, already pivoting, already calculating. We didn't expect you until— I know you didn't. His voice was quiet. That was the thing that scared people most about Roman, the people who actually knew him, not when he raised his voice, because he almost never raised his voice. When he went quiet like this. When he got very still and very quiet, that was when things happened. Camilla set her wine glass down. The sound of crystal on marble was the only thing in the room for a moment. We were having a conversation with Naomi, Enzo said. I was trying to reclaim the frame, the way he always tried to reclaim the frame, with the measured, reasonable voice of a man who believed that how you said something was more important than what you said. A private conversation, about family concerns, about my wife, about the family's future, Roman, which is the same thing. Roman pulled the chair beside Naomi and sat down. Not across the table from his family, not in the seat of opposition, but right beside her, close enough that their arms touched. He leaned forward and looked at the briefcase, at the cash, at the jewelry, and then he looked at his mother. How much? He said. Vittoria didn't answer. How much did you offer her? Vittoria's jaw set. We were trying to— How much, mother? 3 million. Enzo's voice. Flat. Almost proud of the number, in the way that men who have always measured everything in money are proud of large numbers even when the context is monstrous. Plus jewelry, plus the city apartment. Roman was quiet for a moment. 3 million, he said, like he was testing the weight of it. It's a generous offer, Enzo said. More than what?
Roman looked at his father. More than she's worth to you? Because that's what you're describing. You looked at my wife and you decided she had a price, and then you tried to figure out what it was, and you came up with 3 million. That's the math you did.
Roman. Camilla's voice was careful now, the boarding school coolness stripped back slightly to reveal something more anxious underneath. We did this because we love you, because we're worried about… Don't. He looked at his sister. Don't tell me it was love. I heard the whole conversation. The temperature in the room dropped. Camilla's face went through several things in quick succession. You were… outside. Yeah. Vittoria set her hands flat on the table, mirroring Naomi's posture from earlier without seeming to realize she'd done it. Then you understand our concerns. You heard them laid out clearly and honestly, which is more than, I heard you threaten her family. Silence. I heard you bring up Marcus. I heard you mention her aunt's property in Georgia. Roman's voice hadn't changed in volume or speed, and that steadiness was worse than shouting. It was so much worse than shouting. I heard my mother threaten my wife's family at a dining table where you invited her under false pretenses, and I need you to understand something right now. I need that to be completely clear before we say another word. There is no version of this conversation where that was acceptable. There is no justification. There is no context. Are we clear? Roman, you're being emotional, Enzo said. I'm being precise. He looked at his father. Emotional would be something else. What I'm being is precise. Enzo's mouth closed. Naomi had not spoken since Roman entered the room. She was sitting beside him with her hands still flat on the table and her eyes forward, and she was doing the thing she always did, the careful, controlled stillness. But Roman could feel the tension in her arm against his, the fine muscle tremor that she was working to suppress, and it made something in his chest pull tight in a way he had no language for yet. She'd been doing this alone. That was the fact he kept arriving at, underneath all the anger, beneath the cold clarity of what needed to happen next. She had been doing this alone, every dinner where something was said, every invitation that somehow got lost, every time she came home from his family's house a little quieter, a little more careful, a little more contained. He had seen it and told himself it was the adjustment period, the normal friction of merging different worlds, something that would smooth out over time. He had been lying to himself. Or worse, she had been lying to him because she loved him enough to carry this so he wouldn't have to. I want to know how long, he said. Vittoria looked at him without expression. How long has this been going on? The comments, the exclusions, He paused. All of it. How long? Roman, this is not the time. Since the engagement, Naomi said. Her voice was quiet. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the middle of the table, at some fixed point between herself and the Marcelli parents, and her voice was so even it sounded like she was reading from a report. What? Roman turned to look at her. Since the engagement. She said it again, same tone, same flatness. The first time was at the dinner your mother arranged to celebrate, the one where Camilla commented on my dress. Your mother told me afterward, privately, in the kitchen, that Roman deserved a woman with… She paused. Those were her words. She said deserved. Roman turned to look at his mother. Vittoria met his eyes without flinching. She was 63 years old, and she had faced down harder things than her son's anger, and she believed, she had always believed, that she was right. That was the thing about Vittoria Marcelli that made her more dangerous than her husband. She wasn't cruel out of malice. She was cruel out of absolute conviction. I was protecting this family, she said, from my wife. From a choice you made too quickly with your heart instead of your head. You've always done that, Roman, since you were a boy. You feel something and you move on it before you think about the weight of it, about what it means for everything that surrounds you. Her voice was perfectly calm. Naomi is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that. But she is not the right person. She does not fit into the structure of what this family requires, and you know it, and you have been unwilling to admit it because admitting it would mean, stop talking about my wife like she's a casting problem. I'm talking about legacy. You're talking about her skin. Roman's voice dropped lower on that last word, and the room went very, very quiet. Let's be honest about what we're actually talking about, because I've been listening to the polite version for 3 years, and I'm done with the polite version. Say what you mean. Vittoria's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. Say it, Roman said. Roman. Enzo's voice was sharp. No, I want to hear her say what she actually means. Not the legacy speech, not the empire speech. What she actually means. The silence stretched. You know what I mean, Vittoria said finally. You have always known. Yeah. Roman leaned back. His voice had gone flat in a way that was worse than anger. I have. I just kept hoping I was wrong. Naomi looked down at her hands. She didn't make a sound. This family, Roman said, has been running on the idea that I belong to it more than I belong to myself, more than I belong to my marriage. And I have allowed that idea to operate unchallenged for longer than I should have, because I genuinely believed, that the people at this table understood where the line was. He looked at each of them, his mother, his father, his sister, one at a time, the way he looked at people when he was deciding something. You don't understand where the line is, so I'm going to draw it. Camilla shifted in her chair. Roman, you're overreacting. What you did, he said, was sit across from my wife, alone, without me, at a table you chose specifically because it's the most formal room in this house, designed to make people feel outnumbered and small. And you put cash in front of her like she was a liability you were settling. And then when she said no, you threatened Marcus. He stopped. You threatened my wife's brother. We were negotiating, Enzo said. No. Roman shook his head slowly. You were threatening. There's a difference, and you know the difference, because I learned the difference from you. He looked at his father for a long moment. That's what makes this specific conversation particularly clear to me. Enzo's face went through something then. Not shame, not quite, because Enzo Marcelli had not operated in shame for decades, but something adjacent to it, something that looked like a man recognizing his own reflection in a window he hadn't meant to look at. The meeting ended early, Roman said, and the shift in subject was deliberate, pulling back from the edge slightly, so the next thing he said would land harder. I was going to surprise her. I had flowers in the car. I came through the side entrance because I always come through the side entrance when I'm coming from the south. He paused. I heard the briefcase open. I heard the number. I stayed outside because I wanted to see how this played out. He looked at Naomi. I shouldn't have stayed outside. Her jaw tightened, just slightly. The only crack in the stillness she'd been maintaining since he walked in. You were protecting yourself, she said quietly. No. I was doing what I always do. I was watching instead of acting. I was gathering information instead of... He stopped himself, shook his head once. I should have walked in the moment I heard the first sentence. Roman. Vittoria's voice had shifted. The certainty was still there, but something strategic had entered it. The calculation of a woman who was realizing the terrain had changed and was adjusting her approach in real time. Whatever you feel right now, you need to be careful. The decisions you make in the next few minutes will have consequences that go far beyond... I know what the consequences are? Do you? Because if you... I know what the consequences are. He said it again, the same words, slower. I've been running this family's interests since I was 26 years old. I have made decisions in this room that kept all of you protected and comfortable and untouchable. I have done things. We don't need to say what things, but you all know what things. To maintain what this name means and what it's worth. So please don't explain consequences to me. Vittoria closed her mouth. Here is what is going to happen, Roman said. His voice was completely level. Not cold, not hot. Level in the way that structural things are level. The way a wall is level before you decide whether to walk through it or around it. I'm going to take my wife home, and tomorrow we are going to have a different conversation. A conversation about how this family operates going forward. But before I leave this room, I want to be certain that everyone at this table understands one thing clearly. He looked at his mother. One thing. Vittoria held his gaze. Naomi is my wife. Not a choice I made too quickly. Not a phase. Not a rebellion. My wife. And whatever you believe about legacy or image or what the Marcelli name requires, she is the person who stands beside me. She is the person I chose, and I choose her again every day, and that is not a debate. It is not a negotiation. It is a fact, and it will remain a fact regardless of what happens in this room or any other room. He stood. Naomi stood beside him, and he noticed with a precision that would stay with him for a long time, that she stood a half second after he did, not because she was following his lead, but because she was surprised. Like she hadn't quite expected to be included in the standing. That half second told him more than any conversation could have. She had spent 3 years feeling like a guest in her own marriage. He picked up the briefcase. He closed the latch. He held it in one hand and looked at his mother. "I'm taking this," he said, "not because I want the money, because I don't want it sitting on this table while I'm gone." He walked toward the door with his hand at the small of Naomi's back, and they were almost through it when Enzo's voice came from behind them. "You do this," his father said, "and you do it alone. You understand what I'm saying. You step out of this room the way you're about to step out, and you make yourself clear the way you're making yourself clear, and you will not have this family standing behind you." Roman stopped. He turned around slowly. Enzo was standing now. He'd risen from his chair without Roman noticing, and he was standing with both hands on the marble table, and he was doing the thing he'd always done when he wanted to remind his son of the hierarchy. The posture, the weight, the projection of a man who had spent 40 years at the top of something and believed that counted for everything. "I built what you run," Enzo said. "You don't step away from that. Not over this." Roman looked at his father. Something moved through his face. Not anger. Something past anger. Something quieter and more permanent. The look of a man arriving at a door he'd been avoiding his whole life and finding it finally unlocked. "I'm not stepping away from anything," Roman said. "I'm stepping toward something." He held his father's gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he turned and walked his wife out of the room. Behind them, Camilla said something under her breath that Naomi didn't catch. Vittoria said nothing at all. Enzo remained standing with his hands on the marble table, and the sound of his son's footsteps moving away from him down the corridor was the only sound in the east dining room for a long time after the door swung shut. Outside in the corridor, Roman and Naomi walked without speaking. Their footsteps were different, his slower, measuring, and hers quicker, shorter, the automatic pace of someone who is used to moving through places without being meant to linger in them. He noticed this without comment. He kept his hand at her back. They got to the main entry hall, and Naomi stopped. She put both hands over her face and stood there. Not crying. She wasn't crying, she was just stopped. Like a machine that had been running on one particular kind of fuel and had finally run out and was discovering what stillness felt like. Roman set the briefcase down on the entry hall table. He put both arms around her from behind and held on. She didn't lean into it immediately. Her body stayed stiff, the way it got when she'd been holding herself together for too long, and the act of releasing felt more dangerous than the thing she'd been holding against. He felt her breathe, one breath, controlled, then another, and then the third one caught slightly, and she put her hands over his and held them against her stomach. "I didn't want you to know," she said. Her voice was even, too even. "About any of it. I know. I thought if I handled it." "I know," he said again. "We're going to talk about that. But not here." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "How much did you hear?" "Enough." "Roman." "All of it," he said. "I heard all of it." She took one very slow breath and released it, and he felt the shudder in it even though it didn't show on the outside. "Okay," she said. Just that. "Okay." Like she was closing a chart, like she was moving from one room to the next in her brain and shutting the door behind her with practiced efficiency. "The flowers are still in the car," he said. She gave a short sound that might have been a laugh under different circumstances. He picked up the briefcase. She got her coat from the hook by the door. She'd hung it herself when she arrived, because the housekeeper had offered and she'd said no. She had it, the reflex of a woman who'd spent 3 years not wanting to be a bother in this house. And they walked out the front door together. The car was at the bottom of the steps. His driver saw them coming and opened the door without a word. Roman put the briefcase in the trunk. The flowers were on the back seat, yellow ones, her kind, from the market near the private airfield. The one she'd mentioned once in passing 6 months ago, and he had written down on his phone specifically because he knew she'd never ask for them directly. She saw them, stopped for half a second, then got in the car. He got in beside her. The driver started the engine and pulled away from the estate, and through the window Naomi watched the iron gates close behind them. And there was something in how she watched them. Not relief, not entirely, but something complex and unfinished, that told Roman they had not yet arrived at the end of anything. They'd arrived at the beginning of the harder part. which was this, what they'd both been quiet about, what he hadn't seen and she hadn't told him. The 3 years of small cruelties she'd absorbed without complaint because she loved him too much to add her pain to his pile. The way he'd allowed himself to believe in an adjustment period that was never actually adjusting. They'd arrived at the moment when everything they'd each been quietly carrying had to be put on the table. Not a marble one, not with an audience, but the actual table, their kitchen table, at home, in the apartment that was theirs, where none of this had managed to reach yet. Naomi picked up one of the yellow flowers. She turned it in her fingers. She didn't say anything about it. She didn't thank him. She just held it, and he watched her hold it, and neither of them spoke for the first 20 minutes of the drive. Then she said, without looking at him, "Your father meant what he said." Roman looked out his own window. "I know. He's not bluffing. If you—" She stopped. Started again. "If this is the choice you're making, Roman, your family will not back down. You know them. You know how they operate. And the business side of this, the legitimate businesses, the holdings, all of that is, I know what's at stake." "I'm not sure you do." She turned to look at him then, and her eyes were clear, no tears, just direct and serious, the way she looked when she was telling a patient something difficult. "I'm not saying this because I want you to go back in there. I'm saying this because if you step away from your family's support right now, in the current position the operation is in, you will be exposed in ways that, Naomi, I'm serious. I know you're serious." He looked at her. "That's why I need you to understand something. What happened in that room isn't something I can unhear. And what my family has been doing to you for 3 years." He stopped himself, because the anger was still there underneath the composure, and he didn't want the anger to do the talking right now. "There's no version of this where I don't act. There's no version where I hear what I heard and go back to how things were." She was looking at him carefully. "The consequences for my family are my responsibility," he said, "not yours. You don't carry those. I'm your wife, which means you've already carried enough." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the yellow flower in her fingers. "I didn't take the money," she said. "I know. I want you to know that I considered it." She said this with a kind of precision that he recognized. She was being honest in the way that cost her something. For about 2 seconds, the briefcase was open and I looked at it and She paused. "I want you to know that wasn't a clean moment. It wasn't, I didn't heroically reject it. I looked at it and I felt how tired I was. And I thought about what it would mean to just be done with all of this. And then I thought about you, and I pushed it back." He said nothing for a moment. "Thank you for telling me that," he said finally. "I'm not telling you so you'll thank me. I'm telling you because you said what happened in that room." She stopped, chose her words. "I don't want us to be a story where I'm perfect and wronged and you come riding in. I'm telling you that I had a moment of weakness, and I want you to see it, because if we're going to do this, if we're going to actually fix what's been broken in this marriage, it has to be real. It can't be a performance." Roman was quiet. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" "Yeah." He reached over and put his hand over hers, the one holding the flower, and held it lightly. "Okay." The car moved through the city, back toward the apartment that had his name on the deed but felt more like hers. The books on the shelves, the throw pillows she'd picked, the coffee machine she'd calibrated to something he'd since adopted as his own preference without noticing the transition. Back toward the kitchen table. Back toward the part of their life that hadn't been reached yet by what the Marcelli estate could do to people. But Roman knew, with the particular knowledge of a man who had lived inside power structures his whole life, that what Enzo had said in that room was not an idle threat. You do this alone. His father had meant it. The old man had meant every syllable. And the implications of it, the financial exposure, the operational vulnerabilities, the questions about who held what leverage over which parts of the empire, were real, and they were significant, and Roman had known all of that standing in the entry hall when he held Naomi and felt her breathe. He'd calculated it, and he'd walked out anyway. What he hadn't told Naomi, what he was carrying quietly, the way she had once carried things quietly for him, was that the phone in his jacket pocket had buzzed twice during the drive. 2 messages from 2 different men whose names would mean nothing to most people and meant a great deal to Roman. He hadn't looked at them yet. He looked at his wife's hand under his. He looked at the yellow flower. The phone buzzed a 3rd time. And Roman Marcelli sat in the back of his car, heading home with his wife, understanding that what had just happened in his family's dining room was not the end of the crisis. It was the moment before the crisis fully arrived, the last second of quiet before everything his family controlled and everything that had existed in the careful balance he'd spent 15 years maintaining came loose at once. There was no going back now. He'd made sure of that himself. The apartment was quiet when they got home. Roman set the briefcase down by the door. Not inside the closet, not out of sight, just there by the door where he could see it, where they both could see it, because putting it away would have meant treating it like a normal object. And it wasn't a normal object. It was evidence. It was the physical record of what his family had decided his wife was worth, and Roman wasn't ready to make it disappear yet. Naomi went to the kitchen. He heard the water run, heard the cabinet open and close, heard the particular sound of her moving through the kitchen the way she moved through it when she needed something to do with her hands. Purposeful, efficient, the nurse brain taking over when the rest of her was too full. He'd learned to read that sound over 3 years. He'd learned a lot of things about her that he was only now understanding he'd cataloged without acting on. He took his jacket off and hung it over the chair by the door. The phone was in the inside pocket, still buzzing, intermittently, the way it did when someone was trying to reach him through more than one channel. He looked at the jacket for a moment, then left the phone where it was and walked to the kitchen doorway. Naomi was making tea. Not coffee. Tea, which she only made when she was past the point where coffee would help. She had the kettle on, and she was standing with her back to him and her arms crossed over her chest, not hugging herself exactly, more like she was holding her own ribcage together from the outside. "Sit down," Roman said. "I'm making tea." "You can make tea sitting down." She didn't move. He pulled a chair out from the kitchen table and sat in it himself and waited. After a moment, she turned around and leaned against the counter with her arms still crossed and looked at him. Her mascara was intact. Her blazer was still on. She looked like a woman who had assembled herself very carefully that morning and was still, 7 hours later, refusing to let the assembly come apart. "Talk to me," he said. "About what specifically?" "All of it. From the beginning." She looked at him for a long moment. The kettle started to build. "The engagement dinner," she said finally. "That's when it started. Your mother pulled me into the kitchen after dessert, while you were in the other room with your father. She told me she was very pleasant about it. She's always very pleasant. She told me that she hoped I understood what I was getting into, that Roman's life had requirements, that she wasn't sure I'd had the opportunity to understand what those requirements looked like." "What did you say?" "I said I loved your son, and I was looking forward to building a life with him." Naomi's voice was flat. She said, "That's lovely, dear." And then she went back into the dining room, and she was perfectly warm for the rest of the evening, and you had no idea anything had happened. Roman held her gaze. He didn't say anything yet. "After the wedding, it got quieter for a while. I think I actually believed that once it was done, once we were legally married, the resistance would just kind of dissolve. That people adjust." She paused. "They didn't adjust. They just got better at hiding it when you were in the room." "What did they do?" "Roman, what did they do, Naomi, specifically?" She looked at the ceiling briefly. Just a flicker, the way she looked at ceilings when she was deciding how much to say. "Your mother planned a dinner last April. Family dinner, the kind with the extended cousins and the family advisors and everyone. She sent invitations to everyone by card." Naomi paused. "Mine went to the wrong address. She told me later it was a mistake. The address on the card was my address before we were married, an address she had no legitimate reason to have written down if she'd made an actual effort." Roman said nothing. "Camilla told me at your cousin's birthday, the one in the spring, the one at the vineyard, that Roman had dated a woman before me, an Italian woman, from a family that partnered with yours. She told me they'd been expected to marry, that it had been more or less arranged, informally. She told me this casually, like she was catching me up on history I deserved to know." Naomi looked at him. "Is that true?" "Her name was Elena Caruso," he said. "It wasn't arranged. Our families had business together, and our parents thought it made sense. It didn't. We dated for 4 months, 8 years ago, and it ended because she wanted a different life than I was offering. Camilla made it sound like whatever she needed it to sound like." His voice was controlled. "Did you ask me about it?" "No." "Why not?"
Naomi looked at him for a moment. Because I didn't want to seem insecure. You're not.
I know I'm not, but I didn't want to hand them that. I didn't want to come home and say your sister told me about some woman named Elena and have it become a conversation about my confidence. So I filed it and I kept going. Roman put his elbows on the table and pressed his hands together in front of his mouth and breathed through them. What else? He said. The kettle boiled. She turned and poured it and brought 2 mugs to the table and sat down across from him. And for a moment they were just 2 people sitting at a kitchen table in a quiet apartment, and it was almost possible to believe that was all they were. The hospital fundraiser, last November. Naomi wrapped both hands around her mug. Your mother attended. I didn't know she was going to be there. I found out when I arrived. She was charming all evening. She introduced herself to my colleagues. She was warm. She laughed at the right moments. She paused. On the way out, she said to my department head, I was standing right there. I was 3 feet away. She said, Naomi is such a dedicated little nurse. Roman is very proud of her hobby. The word hung there. Hobby. Your department head laughed politely and moved on, and your mother said goodbye to me with a kiss on the cheek, and I stood in the parking lot afterward for 15 minutes before I could drive. Naomi's voice remained even throughout all of this, which was somehow worse than if it had broken. I didn't tell you because you had the Prague situation that week, because you were barely sleeping, because I told myself it wasn't the right time, and then the next week something else was happening, and the week after that, she stopped. There was never a right time, Roman. There was always something. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Not anger, not at her. Something that looked like a man absorbing damage he'd been insulated from and feeling, very late, what it actually weighed. I made it easy for them, she said. I want you to understand that. I'm not only a victim in this. Every time I decided not to tell you, every time I absorbed something and kept going, I made it easier for them to keep doing it. Because there were no consequences. Because you didn't know, so nothing changed, and they knew nothing would change. Why are you defending them? I'm not defending them. I'm being accurate. She looked at him. I made choices too. Choices that I thought were protective and were actually they were avoidance. I was afraid that if I told you, you'd have to choose. And I was afraid of what choosing would cost you. And I was afraid. She stopped, started again. I was afraid you'd ask me to just endure it. Not because I think that's who you are, but because the fear was there, and I didn't trust it enough to test it. The kitchen was very quiet. Roman picked up his mug and set it down without drinking from it. I need to check my phone, he said. Something in how he said it made her look up. What's going on? Probably nothing. Roman. He looked at her for a half-second too long, which was how she always knew when it wasn't probably nothing. He got up and went to the jacket and took the phone out and stood there in the hallway looking at it, and she watched him from the kitchen table and saw his face do something that it almost never did in front of her. It went careful. The way it went careful when something was genuinely wrong. He looked at the screen for a long time. Then he came back to the kitchen and stood in the doorway. I need to make some calls, he said. What happened? I don't know yet. Roman, what happened? He looked at her, and she saw it. The fracture in the composure, just for a second, just enough. Someone moved on the Caruso account, he said, tonight, while we were at the estate. Naomi stared at him. The Caruso account. She didn't know every detail of Roman's operations, but she knew enough. 3 years of marriage had taught her the basic architecture of what he ran, even when he was careful about what he said directly. The Caruso account wasn't just money, it was infrastructure. It was the financial scaffolding on which the legitimate half of the Marcelli operation was built, the piece that made everything else defensible, the piece that made Roman's position in the family empire something other than just inherited criminality. How bad, she said. I don't know yet. He was already pressing a number. Stay here. He went to the living room and she heard the murmur of his voice, low, clipped, the voice he used for operational conversations, the one stripped of everything personal. She sat at the kitchen table with her tea going cold, and she listened to the rhythm of it without being able to make out words. And she did the thing she always did, the assessment thing, the cataloging. The timing was wrong. That was the thing that landed first, the thing that her brain kept returning to as she sat there. The timing was too precise. Roman had walked out of the Marcelli estate less than 2 hours ago. Whatever was happening with the Caruso account had happened during the exact window when Roman was away from his phone, away from his operations, sitting in his family's dining room, and then driving across the city. Someone had known he'd be distracted. Someone had planned around his distraction. She picked up her mug, put it down, looked at the briefcase sitting by the front door. Roman came back into the kitchen 20 minutes later. He looked different, not visibly, not to anyone who didn't know how to read him, but his shoulders were carrying something new, and the way he stood in the kitchen doorway was the way he stood when he was reassessing a situation that had changed while he wasn't looking. "Tell me," she said. He sat down. "The Caruso account was accessed using my credentials," he said. "My authorization codes. $43 million moved to 3 different holding accounts, all of which are now empty. The transfers were signed off by me." He looked at her. "I didn't make those transfers." The room tilted slightly. "Someone used your codes," she said slowly. "Yes." "Someone who had your codes." "Yes." "Which means someone inside the family operation." He said it flatly. Not with disbelief, like Roman Marcelli had not operated with disbelief for a very long time. He said it the way you say a diagnosis. The way Naomi said hard things to families in hospital corridors. Directly, because the alternative was worse. Someone who had access to my authorization infrastructure. Someone who knew my schedule well enough to move during the exact window when I'd be... He stopped. Naomi watched his face. She watched him arrive at it. She could see the moment he got there, the slight change around his eyes, the stillness that was different from his usual stillness, more absolute, like something had simply stopped moving inside him. "Your father," she said. Roman didn't answer. "Roman, your father made that call tonight, in that room. He said you'd be doing this alone. He said you'd be without the family standing behind you. That wasn't a..." She leaned forward. "That wasn't an emotional reaction. He'd already done it. He was telling you it was done." Roman put both hands flat on the table. "The codes," he said, half to himself. "He's had access to the authorization codes since I took over operations. I kept him in the infrastructure because he asked to be involved, because I thought I kept him involved because cutting him out entirely would have been..." He stopped, his jaw tightened. "It would have been a declaration. I wasn't ready to make that declaration. Until tonight. Until tonight." The silence in the kitchen was complete. $43 million, Naomi said. "It's not just the money." He looked up. "The accounts those funds moved through, 3 of them have exposure. Connected assets. If someone wanted to use those transfers to create a paper trail that implicates me in something I didn't do..." He stopped again. "This isn't just financial. This is a setup." "A setup for what?" "I don't know yet." His voice was completely steady, which meant he was genuinely frightened because Roman's voice only went that completely steady when fear had moved past the emotional stage into the operational, when he'd accepted it and was now just working with it. "But Caruso's people are going to see those transfers by morning. They're going to see my name on them, and the Caruso family does not operate the way we operate when they think they've been stolen from." Naomi understood what that meant. She'd been a nurse long enough to understand what certain kinds of statements meant when they were phrased carefully. She looked at her husband and she understood that the problem they were now facing was not just financial ruin or family estrangement. It was the kind of problem that had a body count. "Call them," she said. "Call the Carusos tonight, before morning." "I can't call them without..." "Roman," her voice was sharp. "Call them tonight, before whoever put your name on those transfers has the chance to get there first and frame the narrative. If you wait until morning, you're responding. If you call tonight, you're ahead of it." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "Then call them." "The problem is I can't call them from a position of weakness. I call Caruso tonight. I need something to bring to the table. Something that demonstrates I didn't do this, and that I know exactly who did. If I call him empty-handed, sounding like a man whose family just burned him down, he will not give me the benefit of the doubt. He'll move on you." "Yes." Naomi stood up. She went to the counter and stood there with her back to him for a moment, thinking. He watched her. He'd always watched her think. It was different from how most people thought, quieter and more lateral, the way she'd explained it to him once. "I don't go straight at the problem. I go around it and look at all the sides first, and then I go at it." The transfers were made with your codes, she said, still facing the counter. But they were made from somewhere. A device, a location. Whoever did this left a trail even if they tried to cover it. Yes. And your father had to have help inside the operation. Someone with the technical access to actually execute the transfers, not just the codes. Because Enzo... She turned around. Your father doesn't understand the technical side well enough to do this himself. Someone helped him. Someone in your inner circle. Roman said nothing, but his jaw tightened in a way that told her she was right, and he'd already gotten there. Who's been closest to the authorization infrastructure, she said. Naomi? Who? He looked at her for a moment, then he said a name. Dario. She didn't know Dario. She'd met him twice, at formal events. A man in his mid-50s, quiet, efficient, the kind of man who stood in the background of power structures and was easy to overlook precisely because he was so good at being overlooked. Roman's head of operations. The man who had been with the Marcelli family since before Roman took over, who had worked for Enzo first and transferred his loyalty, Roman had always believed, to Roman when the time came. How long has he been with your father? She said. Roman looked at the table. Since the beginning, he said. My father brought him in, 40 years ago. The weight of that settled into the room. So the loyalty transfer, Naomi said carefully, that was a performance. Roman's voice was very quiet now. Or I allowed myself to believe it was real because it was more convenient than the alternative. He looked like a man who had just understood something about his own life that rewrote a significant portion of it. Not destroyed, Roman was not a man who fell apart when things shifted under him. He was too trained for that. But reconfigured. The way a structure reconfigures itself around a missing support. He picked up his phone. I have to go, he said. Naomi stared at him. Go where? There are people I need to talk to, tonight, in person. He was already moving, jacket, phone, the specific way he assembled himself when the situation required the version of him that was not her husband. I need to get in front of this before Caruso's people are briefed. Roman, it's almost midnight. I know what time it is. You can't just... She followed him into the hallway. You can't walk out of here tonight after what happened today. Not without telling me where you're going and when you'll... Naomi. He turned around, and his face was not unkind, but it was the face of someone operating under pressure that was compressing everything into very small, very necessary movements. I will call you. I will be reachable. But I have to move on this right now tonight, because by morning, the Caruso family will have received information about those transfers. And if I am not already in a room with someone who can validate my position, everything I tried to do tonight, everything I said in that dining room, will not matter, because I will not be in a position to protect anything. She looked at him. Including you, he said. Including Marcus, including your aunt's property in Georgia. If the Carusos move on me, my father's leverage over you becomes real, because I will not be able to counter it. Do you understand? She understood. She understood it in the specific way that people understand things that are genuinely terrible, completely, without softening, without the buffer of disbelief. Come home, she said. As soon as I can. That's not... She stopped. Come home, Roman. Whatever happens tonight, come home. He looked at her for a moment. Then he crossed the hallway and kissed her forehead and held his hand against the side of her face for exactly 3 seconds, and she felt his breath. Not steady, not quite. There was something in it, something he was managing. And then he was gone. The door closed. She heard the elevator. She stood in the hallway of their apartment, and she looked at the briefcase by the door, and she thought about what he'd said. If the Carusos move on me. She went to the kitchen and sat down and picked up her phone and called Marcus. It rang 4 times. Hey, it's late, her brother's voice said, thick with sleep. What's going on? Marcus. She kept her voice even. I need you to listen to me. Don't say anything yet, just listen. I need you to go somewhere tonight. Take Diane and the kids and go somewhere that isn't your house. Don't tell me where, just go somewhere safe and call me when you get there. Silence. Naomi, what? Please. She pressed her hand over her eyes. I'll explain everything. I just need you to move first. More silence. Then the sound of him sitting up, sheets moving, the particular sound of a brother deciding whether to trust his sister's panic at midnight on a Tuesday. Okay, he said. She exhaled. Okay, give me 20 minutes. She put her phone down on the kitchen table and sat there. The apartment was quiet the way it was quiet when Roman wasn't in it, a different quality of quiet, more complete. The tea was cold. The yellow flowers he'd brought were on the counter where she'd put them when they came in, still bundled, not yet in water. She got up and found a vase. She was filling it at the sink when her phone lit up. Unknown number. She stared at it for a moment. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She answered it. Silence on the other end. Then a voice she didn't recognize. A man's voice. Older. Precise. The kind of voice that was accustomed to being heard without having to raise itself. Mrs. Marcelli, the voice said. Yes.
My name is not important right now. What is important is that your husband is driving toward a meeting he believes will help him. I'm calling to tell you it will not. A pause. The meeting was arranged by the same people who arranged the transfers. It is not a conversation. It is a trap. Naomi's hand tightened on the phone. Who are you? She said. Someone who has watched this family for a long time and prefers that your husband survive the next 12 hours. Another pause. He is going to 34 Meridian Street. He will arrive in approximately 11 minutes. If he walks into that building, he will not walk back out on his own terms. Why are you telling me this? Because you are the only person he will answer the phone for right now. The voice was completely without urgency, which was the most frightening quality it had. And because what happens to your husband in the next hour determines what happens to a great many other people, and I have decided I prefer a different outcome. The line went silent. Not dead. She could hear breathing, waiting. Naomi stood at her kitchen sink with water still running over her hand, and she made the decision that she would later identify as the moment when everything that had come before it, the dining room, the briefcase, the 3 years of small cruelties, all of it, was revealed to have been not the crisis itself, but only its preparation. Only the warm-up for the thing she was about to do, the thing that would require her to stop being the woman who absorbed everything quietly and become, in the span of the next few minutes, something she had never needed to be before. She turned off the tap. She picked up her keys. And she called Roman's number as she walked out the door, knowing he might not answer, knowing that if he didn't, she would have to make a decision about 34 Meridian Street on her own, knowing that the woman who had been managing her silence for 3 years to protect her husband was now the only person standing between him and whatever was waiting inside that building. The phone rang, once, twice, and on the third ring, just as she reached the elevator, she heard a sound on the other end of the line that was not Roman's voice but was Roman's breath, sharp, sudden, the specific sound of a man who has just understood that something has gone very wrong. And then the call dropped, and the hallway was silent, and Naomi stood there with the dead phone in her hand and understood that she was out of time. The elevator doors opened and Naomi walked through them without knowing exactly what she was walking toward, only that standing still was no longer a choice available to her. The lobby of their building was empty at this hour. The night doorman looked up from his desk and started to say something, and she walked past him and through the front door and out onto the street, and the night air hit her like a flat hand, cold, sharp, the city at midnight carrying the specific smell of rain that had fallen 3 hours ago, and wet pavement still releasing it. She was still in her burgundy blazer. She hadn't grabbed a coat. She pressed Roman's number again as she moved toward the parking structure across the street. It rang. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, and the sound of his recorded voice, calm, brief, professional, the voice he used for people he didn't know, went through her in a way she didn't have room to process right now. She got to her car and got in and sat there for exactly 2 seconds with both hands on the wheel and her phone on the passenger seat, and she made herself think. Not feel. Think. 34 Meridian Street. She knew the city. 3 years of living in it, 12-hour nursing shifts that sometimes started at 5 in the morning and ended when they ended. She knew how to move through it. Meridian Street was in the financial district, 15 minutes from here at this hour. Old buildings down there, warehouse conversions, private offices, the kind of addresses that didn't have their names on the doors. The unknown caller had said 11 minutes from whenever Roman left the apartment. She didn't know exactly when he'd left. She'd spent 3 minutes standing in the kitchen before she called Marcus. Then the call itself. Then the unknown number. She'd already lost time. She started the car. She pulled out of the parking structure and turned south and pushed the car faster than she usually pushed it,
and she pressed Roman's number a third time on the car's Bluetooth and listened to it ring and go to voicemail again, and then she called a number she rarely called, a number she'd stored in her phone 8 months ago when Roman had pressed it into her palm one evening with a very specific set of instructions. If something happens and you can't reach me, call this. Don't call the police, call this. She'd never asked who it was. She'd put the number in her phone under the letter G because that was all Roman had told her, just G, and she'd carried it around for 8 months, hoping she'd never need it, and now she was doing 70 down an empty street at midnight, and she needed it. It picked up on the first ring. No voice, just the sound of someone listening. "This is Naomi Marcelli," she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "Roman left the apartment approximately 20 minutes ago. I believe he's heading to 34 Meridian Street. I received a call from an unknown number telling me it's a trap. I can't reach him. I'm in a car heading there now." A pause. Then a man's voice, low and very controlled. "Don't go inside the building. I'm not planning to go inside. Don't go near the building. Stay 2 blocks back. Turn your headlights off when you get to Warren Street. Do you understand?" "Yes. I'm moving." The line went dead. She drove. The financial district at midnight was not empty, but it was close. Delivery trucks, a few cabs, the occasional person walking fast with their head down. The old architecture of this part of the city rose on both sides of her, the narrow streets designed for a different century, and she moved through them and turned onto Warren and cut her headlights before she turned and rolled the last half block to where she could see the end of Meridian. She stopped the car. She could see Roman's car. It was parked in front of a building midway down Meridian. A converted warehouse, 4 stories, dark windows on the upper floors, a single light on the ground level behind frosted glass. His driver's car, the black one she recognized, was at the curb with the engine off. That was wrong. The driver always kept the engine running. She stared at the car and felt the fear arrive fully, no longer the managed version she'd been carrying for the last 20 minutes, but the real thing, landing in her chest and sitting there. Her phone lit up. Unknown number. Same one as before. She answered it. "You're on Warren Street," the voice said. Not a question. "Yes." "Roman is inside, ground floor. He went in 11 minutes ago. He believed he was meeting a man named Castor, a Caruso family intermediary. Castor does not exist. The person waiting for him inside is not a Caruso representative." "Then who is it?" A pause that was 1 second too long. "His sister's husband," the voice said. "Matteo Agnelli, who has been managing the financial architecture of the Marcelli operation for the past 2 years with Enzo Marcelli's authorization, and who executed the Caruso transfers this evening." Naomi's hands tightened on the wheel. Matteo Agnelli. She'd met him a dozen times. Camilla's husband, quiet, affable, in the surface way of men who made their living in financial infrastructure. The kind of man who laughed at other men's jokes slightly after everyone else to make sure he'd chosen correctly. She'd never given him particular attention. She'd never had a reason to. "Matteo works for my father-in-law," she said. "Matteo has been working toward becoming your father-in-law," the voice said. "Enzo is 68 years old and his health is not what the family believes it to be. The Caruso transfers were not simply about removing Roman from a position of strength tonight. They were about creating grounds for Enzo to reassign operational authority. With Roman implicated in a financial betrayal of the Caruso partnership, whether or not it can be proven, his position within the family structure becomes untenable, and the person next in the structural line is Matteo. Through Camilla, yes." The picture assembled itself in Naomi's mind with the horrible clarity of something that had always been there and simply required the right angle of light. This wasn't about her. It had never been entirely about her. She had been a convenient problem, the wrong wife, the unsuitable image. But the real target had been Roman's authority all along. His parents' resistance to Naomi was real. Their prejudice was real. The cruelty of that afternoon was completely real. But it had also been useful. It had occupied Roman's attention. It had drawn him to the estate tonight, away from his phone, away from his operations, while Matteo Agnelli used authorization codes that Enzo had provided to move $43 million and construct the architecture of Roman's downfall. The briefcase had been misdirection. Naomi was the misdirection. "How many people are inside that building?" she said. "Unknown. At least 3 beside Matteo." "Is Roman—" She stopped. "Is he hurt?" Unknown. What do you mean unknown? I mean, I don't have eyes inside the building. The voice remained completely level, and she was beginning to understand that this was its permanent state, that whoever G was, they operated from a position of deliberate stillness. What I have is the communication trail that led to this location and the financial documentation of the transfers. That is what I have been compiling since this afternoon. Since this afternoon. She heard herself say it. You've known since... I've suspected since the invitation was sent to your home. The timing aligned with certain movements I'd been monitoring in the Marcelli financial structure. I wasn't certain until the transfers executed tonight. And you called me instead of... I called you because the people I would otherwise call in a situation like this are the people who arranged the situation. A pause. The Marcelli operations' trusted inner circle has been compromised in a way that isn't yet fully mapped. I know Dario is involved. I know Matteo executed the transfers. I don't yet know everyone who participated, which means Roman's usual network is not safe. But I am. You are not connected to the operation. You have no financial stake, no structural role, no reason to be involved in any of this. Another pause. You are also the one person Roman will respond to without calculating whether to trust. She looked at Roman's car parked in front of that building. She looked at the single light behind the frosted glass. I need you to tell me what's in there, she said. What kind of building, what the layout is, what I'm looking at. Mrs. Marcelli, tell me. A brief pause. Ground floor is open plan. Single entrance at street level, loading entrance in the rear. Staircase on the east wall. There is no second way into the ground floor from outside without breaking glass. Another pause. I'm telling you this so you understand why going inside would be a significant mistake. I heard you say not to go in, yet you asked about the layout. I'm a nurse, she said. I always want to know what I'm walking into before I decide whether to walk into it. She picked up her phone and looked at the screen. Then she dialed a number. 3 rings. Naomi. Marcus. Awake, alert. He'd gotten the family moving. She could hear the background noise of it. We're at the hotel. What's happening? I need you to do something for me, she said. I need you to call 911 from a payphone. There's one on the corner of 6th and Madison, the old one that still works, and report a disturbance at 34 Meridian Street. Don't give your name. Hang up after you give the address. Silence. Naomi, what is going... But Marcus, please. Right now. Okay. His voice shifted into the register it went to when he'd decided to trust her completely. The same register it had been in when they were children, and she'd told him to run and he'd run without asking why. Okay, I'm going. She hung up. She got out of the car. She was not going inside. She understood what G had said about the entrance, about the glass, about the significant mistake. She was not going inside. But she was also not sitting in a car 2 blocks away while her husband was in a building with men who had spent the last 12 hours building the architecture of his destruction. She walked to Warren Street and turned on to Meridian and approached Roman's car from the sidewalk. The driver's door was locked. She pressed her face to the glass and saw the driver, a man named Petrov, who she knew by face if not well, who she'd ridden with perhaps 40 times in 3 years, slumped against the door with his eyes closed. Her hand went to the door handle reflexively, and then she stopped herself. Alive. He was breathing. She could see the slow rise of his chest, the way the unconscious breathed differently from the dead, deeper and more rhythmic. Whatever they'd used to put him under had been fast, professional. She straightened up. The light behind the frosted glass on the ground floor was the only movement in the building. She could see shapes behind it, 2, maybe 3 people, the refracted shadows of bodies moving in a lit room behind obscured glass. She walked to the edge of the window. She pressed her back to the exterior wall beside it, the way she'd seen done in 100 movies and had never imagined doing herself, and she listened. Voices. 3 of them, maybe 4. She couldn't make out words through the glass and the wall, just the rhythm of speech. One voice doing most of the talking, 2 others interjecting. The tone was not the tone of people in friendly conversation. It was flat and intermittent, the rhythm of something being explained to someone who is not in a position to argue. Then she heard Roman's voice. She couldn't make out what he was saying, but she heard it, the cadence of it, the particular pace that she knew better than she knew almost anything. And it was controlled. He was talking. He was not making the sounds of a man who was physically hurt, at least not yet. Her shoulders came down a centimeter. She moved back from the wall and looked at the building's face. 4 stories. Fire escape on the right side. She could see the metal rails above the second-floor window, the loading entrance in the back that G had mentioned. She looked at the roofline. She looked at the street. A car was coming. She moved instinctively into the shadow of the building's recessed doorway and watched it pass, a dark car, moving slowly, and as it passed she saw the passenger window come down slightly, and the car didn't stop, just rolled past the building and continued to the end of the block and turned. G. She was sure of it without being sure of why. Her phone buzzed. Text message from the unknown number. Police ETA 9 minutes. Building has a suppressed cell repeater. Roman's phone is blocked. The people inside don't know someone called it in. 9 minutes. She looked at the frosted glass window. She thought about Roman's voice on the other side of it. Controlled, managing the conversation, buying time the way he bought time when he was in a room he needed to get out of. She thought about what G had said. The one person Roman will respond to without calculating whether to trust. She pressed her hands flat against the exterior wall of the building, and she thought about 9 minutes, and she thought about $43 million. And she thought about Matteo Agnelli with his affable laugh and his careful timing, and she thought about the fire escape. She went around to the side of the building. The fire escape ladder was retracted, bottom rung about 12 feet off the ground, the standard position. She looked at it. She was 5'7", and the wall beside the ladder had a drainage pipe bolted to it, old iron, the kind that had been there since the building was a functioning warehouse. She looked at the drainage pipe and she looked at her burgundy blazer, and she thought, with the particular clarity of someone who has passed the point where hesitation is useful, that the blazer was ruined anyway. She grabbed the pipe. It held. She pulled herself up. Her arms were stronger than most people assumed, 3 years of lifting patience, a physical work disguised as care. And she got her feet against the wall and climbed until she could reach the bottom rung of the fire escape. She grabbed it with one hand. The metal was cold and slightly rusted and bit into her palm. She pulled the ladder down. The sound it made was significant. That grinding metal scrape of a fire escape releasing, the kind of sound that in a quiet midnight street felt like a shout. She froze on the wall with the ladder half extended and listened. The voices inside didn't change. The cell repeater. The building was insulated in more ways than one. She descended the pipe and stood on the ground and caught her breath for 3 seconds. Her palm was bleeding lightly from the rust. Not badly, just the thin, bright line of a minor cut across the center of her hand. She pressed it against her blazer and looked at the extended ladder. Second-floor window. Whatever was up there, it was dark and presumably empty. She thought about what she was doing. She thought about Roman's voice, controlled and buying time. She thought about 9 minutes becoming 8 minutes, becoming 7. She climbed the fire escape. The second-floor window was old, the industrial kind, single pane, the latch mechanism visible from outside. She took off her blazer and wrapped it around her right elbow and hit the corner of the glass once, sharply, and it broke inward with a sound that was smaller than she'd expected. She reached through the gap and found the latch and opened the window and climbed through. The second floor was storage. Empty metal shelving units, the smell of dust and old paper, a concrete floor. Dark except for the ambient city light coming through the windows. She stood very still inside the window and listened. Below her, through the floor, she could hear voices more clearly now. Roman's voice. The transfers don't implicate me to anyone who looks at the actual timeline. You know that. You built it, which means you know exactly where the holes are. Another voice, controlled. The specific cadence of a man who believes he has the structural advantage. The timeline is documented with your credentials. The Caruso family doesn't examine timelines, Roman. They respond to results. Matteo. She recognized the voice now that she was closer, the slightly elevated quality of a man who had prepared everything he was about to say, the confidence of someone who had been waiting for this specific moment. Enzo built this, Roman said. This whole thing. You're just the instrument. I prefer architect. A pause. Your father is a practical man. He looked at what you were doing with that woman, and he calculated the cost, and he made a decision. That's what this family does. It calculates and it decides. You know this better than anyone. That woman is my wife. She was a liability, Matteo said, and you chose her over the operation, over the family, over... I chose her over you. Roman's voice was flat. Over you and Camilla, and whatever you've been building for the last 2 years inside my operation, which is what this is actually about. A pause. Shorter than Naomi would have expected. You're smarter than your father gives you credit for, Matteo said. My father has never given me credit for anything, Roman said. That's the part he miscalculated. He thought I was sentimental. He thought walking out of that dining room tonight meant I was operating from emotion. I wasn't. A pause. I was making room. For what? For exactly this conversation. Naomi moved through the storage room toward the staircase, feeling her way in the dark, her hands brushing shelving units, her feet finding the floor carefully with each step. The concrete was cold through her shoes. She found the staircase door and eased it open. The hinges were old, but the building's construction was solid, the old warehouse kind, and it opened without the sound she'd been afraid of. The staircase was dark. One flight down to the ground floor, where the light was. She looked at her phone. No signal. The repeater. 6 minutes, roughly, by her estimation. She sat on the top step of the staircase and listened. The Caruso money is gone, Matteo was saying. By the time you untangle the paper trail, the relationship is already destroyed. The Carusos aren't patient people. You know, I know exactly who the Carusos are, Roman said. I've been managing that relationship since before you married my sister. Then you understand. What I understand is that you needed me in this building tonight. You needed me here, contained, while certain communications were arranged, which tells me the transfers alone weren't enough, which tells me there's a third element, something that required me to be physically present and unavailable while it was executed. Silence from Matteo's side. A longer silence than before. You're right, Roman said into that silence. You are. I can see it. Whatever the third element is, it's running right now, which means I'm not actually the problem you're solving tonight. I'm the distraction. Naomi heard movement below her. Feet on concrete, bodies repositioning. She pressed herself back against the staircase wall. What's the third element? Roman said. Not a question. The tone of someone who was going to keep talking until he found the edge of the shape. Not the transfers. Not me. What's the third? He stopped. She heard it in the stop, the moment of arrival. My wife, he said. The quality of silence in the room below changed completely. Where is she? Roman said. His voice had gone to a place she'd never heard it go. Not loud. The opposite of loud. Something that had dropped below the level of performance entirely and was operating from somewhere more fundamental. Matteo's voice came back, and for the first time there was something in it that hadn't been there before. A carefully managed note that Naomi, trained in reading what people weren't saying out loud, identified immediately as the sound of a man who has not entirely accounted for the thing he's currently facing. She's at the apartment, Matteo said. No, Roman said. She's not. How he knew, Naomi couldn't say. He couldn't see her. He couldn't have heard her. But she knew the moment he said it that he was certain, and she felt the certainty of it move through the floor between them, through the concrete and the dark, and land in her chest like something recognized. Your father sent someone to the apartment, Roman said. That was the third element. While I'm here and Naomi is alone, she heard his breath, a sharp sound, barely audible. Who did he send? Matteo said nothing. Who did he send? Roman? The sound that followed was not something she could categorize easily. It was brief, and it was physical, and it ended with Matteo making a sound that was not quite a word, and then there were other sounds, more movement, more than two people, and Roman's voice again, close to something it almost never got close to. Who did my father send to my apartment? Nobody's hurting her, Matteo said, and his voice was strained now, the prepared quality gone. Nobody's going to hurt her. It was just, they were going to bring her here, as insurance, because we didn't know how this conversation would. You sent people to collect my wife, Roman said. The sentence had no inflection. It was as flat and final as a door closing. You sent people to my home to collect my wife while you had me in this room. Naomi stood up. She stood up because she understood with complete clarity that in approximately the next 90 seconds, the situation inside this room was going to move faster than the police would arrive, and the one variable that none of the men below her had accounted for was that she was not at the apartment. She was here. She went down the stairs. Not silently. She stopped trying for silence because silence was no longer the strategy. She came down the staircase with her footsteps deliberate, and she pushed through the door at the bottom, and she stepped into the light of the ground floor room, and she stood there. The room went still. It was larger than she'd pictured from outside. Open plan, as G had said, with exposed beams and concrete and industrial lighting, the kind of space that had been retrofitted just enough to function and no further. Roman was standing in the center of it with his jacket open and his hands at his sides, and a man Naomi didn't recognize standing slightly too close behind him, which told her what the physical arrangement was without requiring explanation. Matteo was in front of Roman, 6 feet away, and his face when he saw Naomi come through the door went through several things in rapid succession: surprise, calculation, and then a very careful recalibration. 2 other men stood at the perimeter of the room. Naomi noted them the way she noted obstacles in a hospital corridor: their positions, their weight, their attention. Roman looked at her. His face did something she had never seen it do. Not relief, not fear for her. Both of those were present, underneath. But what was on the surface was something that looked very much like the expression of a man who had just been handed the one thing he hadn't thought to hope for and didn't know what to do with the feeling of it. Naomi. His voice was completely even. What are you doing here? I got a phone call, she said. From who? I don't know his name. She looked at Matteo. I know yours, though. Matteo's jaw tightened. How did you get in here? Fire escape. She said it the same way she said blood pressure readings, factual, without performance. Second floor window. The latch mechanism is original to the building. The glass is single pane, and the fire escape ladder releases if you approach it from the drainage pipe on the north wall. She paused. You should fix that. Matteo looked at the man behind Roman. Something passed between them. Nobody needs to get excited, Matteo said. His voice was working to re-find its earlier composure. This is a business conversation. Mrs. Marcelli, I understand you've had a difficult day, and I understand that Roman has presented tonight as a kind of... I heard everything you said, Naomi said. Matteo stopped. I was on the stairs. I heard the conversation from the point where you said the transfers don't implicate him to anyone who examines the actual timeline. She held his gaze. Which tells me you know the documentation has holes. Which tells me you were counting on the Caruso family's emotional response rather than their forensic investigation. Which means the evidence trail can be unwound if someone has the original timestamps and the access logs from the authorization server. The room was very quiet. She's a nurse, Matteo said, half to himself. Pediatric nurse, Roman said. His voice had something in it that, even now, even here, sounded like it might be the edge of something that wasn't quite pride. She pays attention. Matteo looked between them. Naomi watched his face work through the new calculation. She could see the moment he identified the structural problem, that she had appeared in this room outside his planning, that she had information she shouldn't have, that the controlled environment he'd constructed for this conversation had just developed a hole he hadn't designed for. This doesn't change anything, he said. But the certainty that had been in his voice earlier was operating differently now. Your people went to the apartment, Roman said, to bring my wife here. His eyes moved briefly to the man behind him, registering, calculating. She's already here, so your insurance is gone. Roman, the Caruso authorization logs exist, Roman said. Naomi just told you they do. The timestamps on those transfers will show the access sequence, and the access sequence will show it was initialized from an internal terminal, not from my device, which was in my jacket pocket, which was in my car, which was being driven by Petrov, who is currently unconscious in front of this building. He took one step toward Matteo. The man behind him moved, and Roman stopped. Caruso's people are forensic when they have reason to be, and in about 4 minutes they're going to have reason to be. Matteo's eyes went to the door. 4 minutes, he repeated. Someone called it in, Roman said, while you had a signal suppressor running. He paused. Landline. He looked at Naomi when he said that. She looked back at him. Marcus. She'd sent Marcus to a payphone. She hadn't told Roman that. She hadn't told Roman anything. She'd walked down a fire escape and through a second-floor window and into this room. And somehow he had read the chain of events from her face in the 30 seconds since she'd entered and arrived at the correct conclusion. Matteo looked at his two men. Something passed between them, a quick operational glance, the kind that happened between people who had worked together long enough to communicate without speaking. Naomi watched it happen, and she watched Roman watch it happen, and she tracked it with the attention of someone who understood that the next 30 seconds were the ones that would determine everything else. "Last thing I'm going to say," Roman said. His voice had gone to that absolute flatness again, the one below performance. "You put your hands on my wife tonight, or you send anyone else to do it, and there is no version of what follows that ends well for you. I don't mean financially, I don't mean professionally. I mean, in the most fundamental sense of the phrase, Matteo, there is no version of that outcome that ends well for you." He held the other man's gaze. "Are we clear on that?" Matteo looked at him. He looked at Naomi. He looked at his men. The sound of a siren began somewhere outside. Faint at first, the specific two-tone of a police response, and then more of it, and then the blue light began to move through the frosted glass, painting the room an intermittent color. One of Matteo's men moved toward the loading entrance. "Don't," Roman said. The man stopped, not because of the word, because of what was standing behind it. Roman walked to Naomi. He put himself beside her, his arm against hers, their shoulders touching. He didn't put his arm around her. He didn't make it a gesture of protection. He stood beside her the way you stand beside someone when you are with them and not simply near them. And he faced Matteo and his men and the blue light moving through the glass, and he waited. Matteo's composure had been built on control, and the control had been built on a specific set of assumptions. That Roman would be alone, that Naomi would be collected from the apartment, that the conversation would proceed inside a sealed environment until its conclusion. Every assumption was wrong. The environment had been opened from the outside by a woman he'd factored in only as a variable to be managed and had discovered was something significantly more complicated than that. "The police are here," Naomi said, "and you have a choice to make in the next 45 seconds about how this goes." Her voice was completely level. "You can try to control this environment for another 3 minutes until more of them arrive, which is what you'll need to explain what's in this room and how it came to be. Or you can let this go tonight and face what's actually coming, which is a full forensic examination of those transfers conducted by people who are not emotionally invested in the Caruso relationship and who will find every hole in the documentation." She paused. "Because the holes are there. You said so yourself." Matteo stared at her. "You're not police," he said. "You can't—" "I'm not doing anything," she said. "I'm standing here, beside my husband." A pause. "Where I've always been." The sirens were very close now. The blue light was constant. Roman didn't move. He stood beside Naomi in the middle of that concrete room with the industrial lights and the Caruso money somewhere in 3 empty accounts and his father's fingerprints on all of it. And he didn't move because he had spent 20 years learning the specific discipline of not moving when not moving was the correct thing to do, and he was very, very good at it. Matteo made the decision that frightened men make when their architecture collapses and they are left standing in the wreckage with no time to build something new. He made the wrong one. He looked at the man closest to Roman and he nodded once. The man moved. Roman had been waiting for it. He moved left with an efficiency that had nothing graceful about it. It was purely functional, the movement of a man who had grown up inside physical confrontation and had no illusions about what it looked like or cost. He got his arm up, and the momentum of the other man's forward movement became the force that redirected it, and there was a brief, ugly sound of bodies in contact, and then the man was on the floor and Roman was still standing. His breathing had changed. That was the only visible difference. Deeper, faster, the body doing what it did. Naomi had stepped back, not in panic, in the automatic calibration of someone who needed to be out of the way of the specific physical thing happening without being out of the room. She had her back to the shelving unit on the east wall and her eyes on everything. The second man started toward her. She picked up a piece of steel rebar from the shelf behind her, leftover construction material, cold and about 14 inches long, and she held it in both hands and she looked at him and she didn't say anything. He stopped. The door came in. Not broken, opened, from outside, the police arriving at the front entrance, and then shouts, the specific commanding shouts of people with authority and equipment entering a space and asserting control, and the room fractured into its components. Matteo standing still with his hands coming up, his men stopping and doing the same. The rebar in Naomi's hands, and the man standing 3 feet in front of her, and Roman in the center of the room, breathing hard, with the other man on the floor. An officer was speaking. Naomi heard the words without fully processing them. Hands, hands, let me see your hands. And she set the rebar down on the shelf behind her and put her hands up and watched the room fill with the blue light that had been outside the glass for the last 3 minutes. Roman put his hands up too. His eyes found hers across the room. In the noise and the lights and the officers moving through, the scene had the quality of those moments in a hospital when a crisis reaches its external peak, when the code team is in the room and everyone is shouting their precise, necessary information, and the situation is technically still dangerous, but the kind of dangerous that has been handed to people who know how to manage it. The moment after the worst moment. She looked at him. He looked at her. She was bleeding from her palm where the fire escape rust had caught it. Her blazer was gone, left upstairs in the storage room when she'd used it to break the window. She was in her shirt and her good trousers, and she'd been standing in a building on the financial district waterfront at midnight holding a piece of rebar at a man she'd never met. And she was the same woman who had sat in a marble dining room that afternoon with a briefcase full of money, being told she had a price. The distance between those two moments was approximately 9 hours and approximately 9 years' worth of transformation, and she was still standing. Roman was still standing. An officer was saying something to her, directing her toward the entrance, asking if she was injured, looking at her palm. She answered automatically, the nurse voice, calm and informational. She looked over the officer's shoulder at Roman, who was being spoken to by 2 other officers, whose composure was absolute in the way it got when he was managing a situation that required him to be 3 things at once. He was looking back at her. His mouth moved. She couldn't hear it over the noise. But she read it. You came. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked down at her bleeding palm and thought about the fire escape and the drainage pipe and the second-floor window and the rebar on the shelf. And she thought about the 9 hours between the marble table and this concrete floor. And she felt something move through her that wasn't quite triumph and wasn't quite exhaustion, but was somewhere between them. The particular feeling of a person who has discovered, under pressure that had been designed to break them, that they are made of something other than what their enemies assumed. Outside, through the broken line of officers and the open door, she could see the street. She could see Roman's car, still at the curb. She could see Petrov being helped to a sitting position by a paramedic. She could see, at the end of the block, a dark car sitting with its lights off. She looked at it for a long moment. The car's engine started. It pulled away from the curb and moved slowly down the street and turned a corner and was gone. And Naomi stood in the doorway of 34 Meridian Street with a police officer beside her and her bleeding palm pressed against her shirt, and she watched it go. And she understood that G had been here, had watched this, had perhaps been in this building in some way she hadn't known, and had disappeared now into whatever background they operated from. She would never know who G was. She had a feeling Roman might. She had a feeling that conversation was one of many that were waiting for them now, on the other side of tonight. Conversations about the things he'd protected her from, conversations about the things she'd protected him from, conversations about the years they'd spent managing each other's loads without actually setting them down together. The real work, not the crisis. The work that came after the crisis. When the adrenaline cleared and you had to sit across from someone at a kitchen table and be honest about the distance you'd allowed to grow between you while you were busy protecting them from the distance. She pressed her palm harder against her shirt. An officer was asking her to come outside. She came outside. Roman was being escorted to the curb, not in cuffs. They weren't cuffing him, which told her something was already moving on the communication side, that someone had made a call or the situation had been partially explained to whoever was in charge. He saw her come out, and he crossed toward her immediately, and the officer with him started to redirect, and Roman said something quiet to him, and the officer stepped back. He got to her. He took her bleeding hand in both of his and looked at it. "I'm fine," she said. "I know," he said, but he didn't let go. They stood on the sidewalk outside 34 Meridian Street with police behind them and the city doing what the city did at midnight, moving, indifferent, enormous, its own logic entirely separate from the small and enormous thing that had just taken place inside a warehouse conversion on a street that most people in this city had never needed to know about. "My father is going to be arrested by morning," Roman said. His voice was quiet and it was steady, and it had the quality of a man stating something he has fully accepted and is now simply locating in time. Matteo, Dario, all of them. I know, she said. The operation is going to go through a period that is going to be, he paused. It's going to be very difficult. I know that too. Naomi. He looked at her. How did you know to come here? I told you, someone called me. Who? She looked at him. I don't know his name, she said. He told me to call him G. Something moved across Roman's face. Recognition, and behind the recognition, something complicated. Gratitude, maybe, or the specific complicated feeling of a man discovering that he had been looked after by someone he hadn't known was looking. Okay, he said. Is that? Later, he said. I'll explain it later. She nodded once. He looked at her hand, at the cut across her palm. Fire escape, she said. I know. You told Matteo. I did. You also told him the documentation has holes. It does, doesn't it? He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. It does. Then we use that, she said. Tomorrow. That's how we start unwinding this. He was still holding her hand. Naomi. His voice shifted, dropped to something beneath the operational, the crisis management, the place where he was still running calculations and strategies and the 20,000-piece chess game of what happened next. I'm sorry, she looked at him. For not seeing it, he said. For the 3 years. For making you. For letting you be the person who carried all of this because you thought. He stopped. I'm sorry. She was quiet for a moment. We're going to have that conversation, she said. The real version. At our kitchen table. When this is done. Yes. Not tonight. No. Tonight I need a paramedic to look at this hand, and I need to call my brother, and I need to find my blazer, which is on the second floor of this building. She looked at him. And I need you to tell me we're going home after. We're going home after, he said. She held his gaze. The city moved around them. An officer was approaching with a paramedic beside him, and from inside the building, Naomi could hear the specific organized noise of the situation being processed, people being sorted, the mechanical justice of consequences beginning to arrive for the people who had set this in motion. All of it, the whole chain of events that had started with a briefcase on a marble table and a family's conviction that she could be made to disappear, arriving now at this street, this moment, Roman's hands around her bleeding palm and the dark building behind them and the long, necessary road of everything that was about to follow. She wasn't afraid of the road. She had walked into worse than this tonight and come through it standing. So had he. The paramedic reached them, and Roman stepped to the side but kept his hand on her shoulder. Not possessively, not protectively, not as a statement to anyone watching. Just present. Just there. Where he should have been all along. Where, she thought. Watching the city and the lights and the slow, grinding mechanism of accountability beginning to turn. Where he was going to stay. The paramedic's name was Torres, and she had the particular efficiency of someone who had worked midnight shifts long enough to stop being surprised by anything, including a woman in a torn dress shirt with rust blood on her palm, standing outside a warehouse in the financial district while police processed the building behind her. How'd you get this? Torres said, holding Naomi's hand under a flashlight. Fire escape. Torres cleaned the cut with the particular focus of someone who found the work itself more interesting than the circumstances. You a nurse? Pediatric. Then you know this needs a couple of steri strips and you need a tetanus update if you haven't had one in the last 5 years. 3 years ago, Naomi said. I'm current. Good. Torres applied the strips with practiced speed, her hands moving the way Naomi's hands moved. Not hurried, not slow, just the efficient pace of competence. You're going to want to keep this dry for 48 hours. Okay. Torres released her hand, looked at her face for a moment with the slightly different attention of a medical person looking at another medical person. You doing all right otherwise? I'm fine. Torres held the look a second longer than necessary, then nodded and moved on to Petrov, who was sitting on the curb with a blanket over his shoulders, looking deeply embarrassed, which Naomi suspected was how Petrov responded to most things that happened to him outside of his control. Roman was 30 feet away talking to 2 men who were not in uniform. Detectives, by the look of them, or something adjacent to detectives. The kind of men whose identification came out of a specific kind of wallet that meant their calls went through to specific kinds of people. Roman was talking with his hands slightly, which he almost never did, and whatever he was saying had the quality of a man laying out a documented argument rather than defending himself. Measured, sequential, the voice of someone who has the evidence and knows how to present it. She watched him. She thought about the phone calls he'd been making in the living room while she sat at the kitchen table with her cold tea. She thought about G. She thought about the fact that Roman Marcelli had spent 15 years building operational intelligence, and that while she'd been on the fire escape with rust on her hands, he had been in that room doing what he always did in rooms, calculating, positioning, preparing the ground for what came next. He hadn't been simply surviving in there, he had been buying time while she arrived. She wasn't sure he knew that's what he was doing, but she thought maybe he had. An officer came to her with a notepad and began the process of taking her statement, and she gave it cleanly, in the ordered, detail-specific way she gave medical reports. Events in sequence, observations separated from interpretation, nothing editorialized. The officer's pen moved steadily. She told him about the phone call from the unknown number, about Marcus at the payphone, about the fire escape and the window and the second floor. She described Matteo's position in the room and the two men in the conversation she'd overheard on the stairs. When she got to the part about the rebar, the officer looked up at her. "You picked up a piece of rebar," he said. "It was on the shelf behind me," she said. "I held it. I didn't use it." The man backed off? "He reassessed," she said. The officer looked at her for a moment, then wrote something down. It took 40 minutes. By the time the officer finished and moved on, Roman had concluded his conversation with the plainclothes men and was walking toward her, and she could see from across the sidewalk that whatever had been said had shifted the operational landscape in some meaningful way. His posture carried something that wasn't relief exactly, but was the specific quality of a man who has identified a path through difficult terrain and is now on it. He reached her and stood close enough that she could hear him clearly without raising his voice. "Dario is already in custody," he said. "He was picked up 20 minutes ago. Someone fed the location and timeline to the right people before we got here." "G," she said. "Yes." "Who is G?" "Roman." He was quiet for a moment. "Someone who has been watching this family for a long time. Not an enemy, not exactly a friend. Someone who has a specific interest in the Marcelli operation, continuing under management that doesn't involve Matteo Agnelli or what Matteo Agnelli represents." He paused. "The full answer to that question is going to take more than a sidewalk at midnight." "Kitchen table," she said. "Kitchen table," he agreed. "All of it." "All of it." He looked at her. "Naomi, I need to—" "I know," she said. "You need to go handle whatever comes next. Tonight. I know." She looked at him steadily. "Go. Handle it." "But Roman—" She waited until he was fully focused on her face. "Come home tonight. I don't care what time. Come home." "I will." "I mean it." "I know you mean it." He held her gaze. "I'll come home." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once and stepped back, and he moved away toward the plainclothes men, and she stood on the sidewalk and watched him go and felt the particular specific exhaustion of a person who has been operating at maximum capacity for 9 consecutive hours and is only now, in this moment of stillness, beginning to feel the full weight of it in their body. Her feet hurt. She hadn't noticed until now. She called Marcus. He answered before the first ring completed. "Tell me." "I'm fine," she said. "Roman is fine." "Are you and Diane settled?" "We're at the Marriott on 5th. The kids are asleep. Diane wants to know what's happening." "Tell Diane I'll explain everything tomorrow. You're not in any danger tonight. The people who were— The threat has been addressed. You can go home tomorrow." Silence. Then, "Naomi, what happened tonight?" She thought about how to answer this. She looked at the building behind her, at the police tape that had gone up across the entrance, at the officers moving in and out with the systematic focus of people doing paperwork that would take much longer than tonight to complete. "Something that's been building for a long time," she said, finally came to a head. "Are you actually okay?" She looked at her palm. The steri strips were clean and neat, Taurus's work precise the way good nursing work is precise. "I'm actually okay," she said. "I promise."
Another pause. I want to see you tomorrow. Tomorrow, she said. I'll come to you. She hung up. She looked around for the blazer and then remembered it was on the second floor of the building and decided, after a brief internal calculation, that the blazer was a loss she could accept. She found an officer who told her she was free to go and asked if she needed a car. And she said no, she had her car on Warren Street, and she walked back to it alone. The city around her was doing what it always did. A cab passed. A delivery truck turned a corner. The rain smell was mostly gone now, replaced by the ordinary smell of the city in the small hours. Exhaust and concrete and something indefinable that was just the smell of a lot of people living near each other. She got in her car and sat there and let herself be still for 60 seconds. Then she drove home. The apartment was exactly as they'd left it. The briefcase by the door, the cold mugs on the kitchen table, the yellow flowers in the vase she'd filled before everything escalated. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the flowers and thought that they seemed like they'd happened 3 days ago. She poured the cold tea down the sink. She made new tea. She sat at the kitchen table and she drank it slowly, and she did not turn on the television, and she did not look at her phone beyond the one text she sent Roman, home. I'm fine, come home. And she sat with herself in the quiet apartment, and she let herself feel, finally, without management, all the things she'd been managing since she drove through the Marcelli estate gates that afternoon. The fear. The older fear, the one that had been accumulating for 3 years, that she had been wrong to stay, wrong to absorb it, wrong to protect him from it, wrong to believe that love was sufficient armor against systematic diminishment. The briefcase on the marble table, Vittoria's pleasant voice telling her she would never fit. Camilla's throwaway assessment that Roman would tire of her eventually. 9 hours ago, she had sat across from those words and absorbed them with her hands flat and her face still. Now she sat at her kitchen table at 2 a.m. with a cut on her palm and no blazer and rust somewhere on her shirt, and she thought about the fire escape and the rebar and the moment she'd walked through the door of that ground floor room and Matteo Agnelli's face had done the specific thing it did when a plan encounters something it hadn't planned for. She had been that thing. She had been the unplanned element. She picked up the yellow flower she'd left on the table, still there, separate from the vase, the one she'd been turning in her fingers in the car, and she held it for a moment. Then she put it in the vase with the others. She went to bed. She didn't sleep well, but she didn't expect to. She lay in the dark and her mind moved through the day's events, the way her mind moved through complicated cases at the hospital. Not anxiously, just processing, filing, drawing the connections between things. At 3:47, she heard the apartment door open, and she heard Roman moving through the apartment with the particular careful quiet he used when he thought she was asleep. And she felt something in her chest release that she hadn't known was held tight. She heard him stop in the kitchen. She heard the refrigerator open and close. Then his footsteps in the hallway and the bedroom door opening, and she heard him stop when he saw she was awake. I said I'd come home, he said. I know. She reached over and turned the lamp on. He looked like the day had taken something out of him that would need time to restore. Not broken. Roman didn't break in the visible ways. But the composure he usually carried like a second skin was thinner tonight, and underneath it she could see something tired and human and real. He sat on the edge of the bed. He sat there without speaking for a moment, and she let him. My father is in custody, he said finally. Matteo, Dario, 2 others from the operational team. He looked at his hands. The Caruso family has been briefed. The documentation G compiled. The actual server logs, the terminal access records, the timestamp sequences. It's enough. It's more than enough. They know the transfers weren't mine. Okay, she said. The relationship it's going to require a lot of work, a lot of conversation. The Carusos don't forgive quickly, and the fact that the breach happened inside the Marcelli operation at all is a problem they're going to need to see addressed. He paused. But they're not going to move on me. Good. He looked up at her. The legitimate businesses, the holdings, the financial infrastructure that was built around the Caruso partnership, all of that is in flux right now. The next several months are going to be Roman. She looked at him. I'm not asking you to give me the operational briefing. He stopped. It's 2 a.m, she said. You came home. I'm glad you came home. She held his gaze. The rest of that is for tomorrow, or the day after, not right now. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something she hadn't expected. His composure came apart. Not dramatically,
Roman Marcelli did not do things dramatically. It wasn't in his architecture. It came apart the way controlled things come apart when the control is finally, deliberately released. His shoulders dropped. His jaw loosened. The particular quality of alertness that had been in his face since she'd walked through the door of that warehouse on Meridian Street, the operational awareness that never fully switched off. It switched off. He put his face in his hands, not crying, just in his hands, breathing. She moved to sit beside him on the edge of the bed. Their shoulders touched. She didn't put her arm around him or speak or try to move the moment into something more manageable. She just sat there with him the way he'd sat beside her in the car coming home from the estate, close enough that the contact was real, steady enough that it didn't need to say anything. After a while, he took his face out of his hands. "I heard her say hobby," he said. His voice was quiet and rough. "At the hospital fundraiser, when she told your department head, Roman, I heard that tonight, on the stairs." He looked at the floor. "You told me about it tonight in the kitchen, and I heard it again, and I thought about every single time I brought you to something connected to my family, and I thought about what you were carrying every single time, and I—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. "I want to say I didn't know, but that's not entirely true. I knew something was wrong. I told myself it was adjustment. I told myself it would smooth out." He shook his head slowly. "I was a coward." "You weren't a coward," she said. "I looked away." "Yes," she said. "You did. That's different." He looked at her. "A coward wouldn't have walked into that dining room," she said. "A coward wouldn't have stood beside me and asked which one of them decided I had a price. A coward wouldn't have, Roman, you walked out on your father's ultimatum knowing what it would cost you, knowing the exposure it created, knowing all of it." She held his gaze. "You looked away for a long time, and then you stopped. Those aren't the same thing." He was quiet. "I also looked away," she said. "I absorbed things I should have told you. I made decisions about what you could handle that I had no right to make. I treated our marriage like something I was managing instead of something we were building together." She looked at her bandaged palm. "Neither of us was operating the way we should have been, but that doesn't mean we can't change how we operate." "Is that what you want?" he said. "To change how we operate?" "I want to stop protecting each other from things we should be facing together," she said. "Yes, that's what I want." He was quiet for a long moment. "The kitchen table conversation," he said. "Not tonight," she said, "but soon." He nodded. "Who is G?" she said. He looked at her sideways. "Tomorrow." "Roman." "Tomorrow," he said again. "I promise. Tomorrow I will tell you everything, who G is, what the relationship is, what it means for the operation going forward." He looked at her. "Every single thing. Tomorrow. Tonight I just—" He stopped. "Tonight I just want to be in this room." She looked at him for a moment. "Okay," she said. He reached over and turned the lamp off. In the dark they rearranged, settling into the familiar topography of how they slept. His arm, her shoulder, the specific arrangement they'd arrived at in the first months of their marriage and never significantly altered. Her bandaged hand rested on top of the covers. He found it in the dark and held it, carefully, around the steri strips. She listened to him breathe until she heard the rhythm change into sleep. Then she lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about the day with the specific clarity that very late nights sometimes provide, when exhaustion has burned through the emotional residue and what's left is just the truth of things in their simplest form. They were still here, both of them. That was not a small thing. She closed her eyes. In the morning she woke before him, which was unusual. Roman was an early riser by training, the kind of person who had conditioned himself out of the preference for sleep through years of needing to be somewhere before other people were prepared for him to be there. But it was 8:30 and he was still asleep, and she lay beside him for a moment and looked at his face in the flat morning light, the specific vulnerability of people asleep, the way sleep stripped away everything curated, and she thought that she had spent 3 years loving this man and was still discovering the shapes of who he was. She got up carefully and went to the kitchen and made coffee. His way, not her way, the way she'd been making it since she learned it from watching him in the first weeks of their marriage, before she'd even realized she was learning it. Her phone had 16 messages and 4 missed calls. She looked at the calls first, two from numbers she didn't recognize. One from a colleague at the hospital, probably news-related, something this public would reach the hospital within hours, if it hadn't already. One from an unknown number that she suspected was the same one that had called her the night before. She put the phone face down on the counter. She drank her coffee standing at the kitchen window and watched the city move in its morning configuration. The different energy of 8:30 a.m. versus midnight, the purposeful crowd of people going somewhere, the delivery bikes, the school bus making its particular ponderous turns. The city had no memory of last night. The city didn't hold its events. It just kept moving, which was either indifferent or comforting depending on what you needed it to be. She heard Roman get up, heard the shower. 20 minutes later, he came into the kitchen in a clean shirt, his face composed in the morning way. Not the operational composure, just the ordinary composure of a person who has had some sleep and made their way back to themselves. He stopped when he saw the coffee already made. He looked at it for a moment, then poured a cup and came to stand beside her at the window. They stood there together looking at the street. "Tell me about G," she said. He drank his coffee. "His name is Vincent Carolla. He was someone my father trusted a long time ago, before I took over operations. When I took over, I kept him at arm's length because his loyalty had always been to my father and I didn't trust the transfer." He paused. 2 years ago, he came to me privately. He told me he had information suggesting that someone inside the operation was positioning for a structural shift. He didn't have enough to be specific. He offered to watch and report. Roman looked at the window. "I told him I appreciated it, and I'd be in touch, and I stored his number in my phone under G because I didn't know what to make of him, and I didn't want his name anywhere accessible. And he's been watching since then. He's been building a file since then," Roman said. "What he gave to the investigators last night, the server logs, the access records, the financial documentation, he's been compiling that for months. He knew about Matteo. He knew about Dario. He didn't know the full timeline until the transfers actually executed. Why didn't he come to you directly? Because by the time he had enough to bring to me, he wasn't certain who in my circle was safe to approach." Roman looked at his coffee cup. "He came to you instead because you were the one person he was certain wasn't connected to any of it." She thought about the voice on the phone, its deliberate calm. "Someone who has watched this family for a long time and prefers that your husband survive the next 12 hours. "Does he want something?" she said. "He wants the operation to continue under management he trusts," Roman said. "He's old. He spent his whole adult life inside this structure, and he's watching it almost collapse from the inside, and I think he wanted to do one thing that mattered before he's done." He paused. "That's what I believe. But we'll talk to him. You and I, together." She looked at him. "You want me in that conversation?" "I want you in every conversation that matters from here forward." He said it simply, without performance. "That's what I want." She looked back at the window. "The hospital fundraiser," she said. He was quiet. "Your mother called me a hobby in front of Dr. Chiang." She kept her voice level, factual. "I want you to know what that cost me. I want you to know that I stood in the parking lot afterward for 15 minutes because I couldn't trust myself to drive. And I didn't tell you because I'd already decided that protecting you was more important than saying the true thing. And I'm telling you now because I need you to understand the actual weight of it, not so you feel worse. So we're starting from the real place." Roman said nothing for a moment. "Tell me the other things," he said. "All of them. Every single one." "That'll take time." "We have time." She looked at him. "Your father called me unsuitable. To your mother, at the dinner last Christmas. I overheard it from the other room. He didn't know I was there. He said Roman had made a romantic choice rather than a strategic one, and that eventually the romance would run its course." She paused. "Camilla told me once at the vineyard that I dressed like someone who was trying too hard. She said it pleasantly. She said she wanted to help me understand the aesthetic of the family because she thought it would make my life easier." Another pause. "I thanked her." Roman's hand tightened around his mug. "I thanked her," Naomi said again, "because I had been doing the calculation all along, the one where I weighed the cost of saying what I actually wanted to say against the cost of keeping peace, and keeping peace kept winning, and every time it won I told myself it was the mature choice, the strategic choice, and I believed it." She looked at him. "But I was also just afraid. I want to be honest about that too. I was afraid that if I pushed back, if I made it a confrontation, you'd have to choose a side and I'd find out something I didn't want to find out. That I'd choose them. Yes. He set his coffee cup down on the windowsill and turned to face her. Look at me, he said. She looked at him. I chose you 3 years ago, he said, in that courthouse, with 2 witnesses and a judge who had somewhere else to be. He held her gaze. I chose you again in that dining room yesterday. I chose you on Meridian Street last night. He paused. I'm choosing you right now, standing in this kitchen. I will keep choosing you. That is not going to change. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said. Then stop calculating, he said. Stop running the numbers on what I can handle and what you should protect me from. Tell me the things. Let me be there for the things. You have to also tell me the things, she said. I know. G being in your phone for 2 years, she said. You knowing something was moving inside the operation and not telling me. She held his gaze. We both did the same thing, Roman. We both decided that carrying it alone was somehow more loving than sharing it. We were both wrong. He held her gaze. We were both wrong, he said. She picked up her coffee. Okay, she said. He picked up his. They stood at the window together and drank their coffee and watched the city, and the conversation that needed to happen was not done. Would not be done for weeks, maybe months, the real excavation of 3 years of careful silence on both sides. But the room felt different than it had felt at any point in the last 24 hours, and the difference was something she didn't have a single word for. Lighter, maybe. Or more honest. Or simply more real than it had been. The particular quality of a space where performance has been set down and what's left is just the actual thing. The phone on the counter buzzed. She ignored it. He ignored it. After a while, he said, There's going to be a lot in the news. I know. The family name, the arrests, the financial investigation. He paused. It will connect back to the estate, to yesterday's meeting. There may be people who know you were there, who know about the briefcase, who try to make it Roman. He stopped. I sat across from your mother and pushed $3 million back across a marble table, she said. If someone wants to make something of that, let them. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Yeah, just that. Yeah. With something in it that wasn't quite a smile, but was the expression that lived one layer underneath a smile, the one she'd learned to read in the first year of their marriage, the one that meant he was moved by something and had not yet found the language for it. She went to shower and change, and when she came back, he was at the kitchen table with his laptop and several printed documents and his phone, the operational Roman, the one who would need to be Roman Marcelli for the next several weeks in ways that would be demanding and exhausting and occasionally frightening. She sat across from him with her own phone and began the process of dealing with the 16 messages. Dr. Xiang's message was careful and kind and asked if she was all right and said her job was safe and the hospital supported her regardless of what the news said. She wrote back and thanked him and told him she'd be in for her scheduled shift on Thursday. She was a nurse. She had patience. Those things continued. 2 weeks later, Enzo Marcelli's bail hearing was covered by 3 newspapers and a television crew. Naomi didn't watch the coverage. She learned about the bail decision from Roman over the phone, calling between meetings, his voice carrying the specific flattened quality of a man relaying information about his own father's legal proceedings without allowing himself to feel it completely in real time. He's out on bail, Roman said. The financial charges are solid. The criminal conspiracy piece is going to take longer. How are you? She said. A pause. Complicated. Okay. I don't want to talk about it right now. Okay? Come home for dinner. He came home for dinner. They sat at the kitchen table and ate food she'd made from a recipe Marcus had texted her. Their mother's chicken, which she hadn't made in years. And Roman ate 2 full plates and didn't talk much, and she didn't push. And at some point during the second plate, the flatness in his face gave way to something more present, and he looked up at her. It's good, he said. Marcus's text had 14 steps, she said. I skipped 2. Which 2? I don't know what they were supposed to accomplish. He looked at his plate. It's still good. She looked at him. I know it's your father, she said. I know it's complicated. I know you love him even though... She paused. Even though... He was quiet for a long moment. He built everything I run, Roman said. Everything I know about this business I learned from watching him. The way you read a room, the way you choose who to trust and how much, the way you make a decision and commit to it all the way. He looked at the table. He taught me all of that. And then he used all of that against me, against my marriage, against... He stopped. It's not simple. No, she said. I'm not going to pretend it's simple. I'm not asking you to. He looked at her. Are you asking me to cut him off completely, permanently? Because if that's what you... Roman. She held his gaze. He threatened my family. He arranged to have me collected from this apartment like a package. He put your name on a financial crime to destroy your position. She paused. I'm not going to pretend that's simple either. But what happens between you and your father, long term, is not a decision I'm going to make for you. That's yours. What if I make the wrong choice? Then we'll deal with the consequences of the wrong choice together, she said. That's what together means. He looked at her for a long moment. Camilla called me, he said. Naomi set her fork down. She called me 3 days ago. I didn't tell you because I was still deciding what to do with it. He held her gaze. She said she didn't know about the Meridian Street plan. She said she didn't know Mateo was going to... She said she thought this was just about the money, just about getting you to take the offer. Do you believe her? He was quiet. I don't know. That's honest. She was crying, he said. Camilla doesn't cry. In our whole lives, I have seen her cry twice. She was... He stopped. I don't know what to do with her. Naomi picked her fork back up. She ate. She let him sit with it. She has to answer for what she did, Naomi said finally. In that dining room, the things she said, the things she participated in. Even if she didn't know about Meridian Street, she was at that table. She was one of the people who looked at me and decided I had a number. She held his gaze. Whatever relationship you have with her going forward, that has to be acknowledged. Not by you, by her, to me, directly. I'll tell her that. Don't tell her for me, Naomi said. Tell her because it's true. He held her gaze. Because your sister looked at me and decided I was less than, she said. And I spent 3 years letting her and her family do that without saying anything, and I'm done with the silence. I don't want revenge. I don't want anyone to suffer unnecessarily. But I want the truth to be said out loud, by the people who need to say it. That's what I want. Okay, he said. Okay. She picked up his empty plate and her own and carried them to the sink and stood there for a moment with the water running, and he came up behind her and put his arms around her from behind, the way he had the night she'd almost fallen apart in the hallway, and she stood there with the water running and let him hold on. The water went cold. She turned it off. 6 weeks after the arrests, Roman restructured the legitimate side of the Marcelli operation entirely. He didn't talk about it much at home, not because he was hiding it, but because the work itself was dense and technical, and not the part of their shared life that needed to be processed together. She understood this. She had her own work, her patients, her department, her 12-hour shifts that started at 5 in the morning and ended when they ended. And they moved through those weeks in parallel, separately and together, the way real lives work, the way two people with real occupations and real exhaustion and a real marriage under reconstruction actually function. He kept his promise about transparency. Not perfectly. I was Roman Marcelli, and transparency did not come naturally to him, and there were moments when she could see him starting to manage something, starting to calculate what she could handle and what to shield her from. And she would look at him until he noticed her looking, and then he would stop managing and say the actual thing. It took practice. It took more than once. But he kept doing it, and she kept looking, and the kitchen table conversations that had been waiting accumulated over those weeks and were had, one at a time, not always easily, sometimes badly, sometimes with raised voices that neither of them was accustomed to using on each other, and always, always, ending with both of them still in the room. Vittoria Marcelli sent a card. Not to Roman. To Naomi. Handwritten, the same heavy cream stationery, the same careful penmanship. Brief. The card said, I was wrong about what I thought I knew. I do not expect forgiveness. I am writing because not writing would be a kind of cowardice I am no longer interested in practicing. No signature. Naomi recognized the handwriting. She put the card in the drawer of the bedside table. She didn't throw it away, and she didn't respond. She wasn't ready to respond, and she had stopped making herself do things she wasn't ready to do in order to manage other people's comfort. That was a change. A real one. She noticed it the way you notice changes that have happened gradually. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the accumulation of small moments where you chose differently than you once would have chosen, until the different choice was simply who you were. 3 months after Meridian Street, Roman came home from a meeting that had run late, and she was already in bed with a book she wasn't reading, and he sat on the edge of the bed and said, "The Caruso relationship is rebuilt." She looked up from the book. Rebuilt or rebuilt? Actually rebuilt. Aldo Caruso. The son, not the father. He's the one I've been working with, and He paused. He's someone I can work with. He saw the documentation. He understood what happened. He's practical about the future. And the Marcelli name carries weight differently now than it did 3 months ago. He looked at her. Some of that weight is gone. The kind that required certain arrangements to maintain. The kind that... He stopped. I'm still figuring out who I am without some of those arrangements. The ones I thought were structural and turned out to be... He looked at the wall. Load-bearing things I'd built that didn't actually need to bear that load. What does that mean for the operation? It means it runs leaner, more legitimately, more exposed in ways to normal accountability. He looked at her, which is uncomfortable. But it's also something I can look at without... He stopped again. I'm working on the language for this. Take your time. He looked at her. I want to build something different, he said. Going forward, something that doesn't require... I don't want to spend the next 20 years doing the things I've spent the last 20 years doing. I don't know exactly what the different thing looks like yet, but I want to start building toward it. She put the book down. Okay, she said, that might mean changes you didn't sign up for. Roman. She looked at him. 3 months ago, I climbed a fire escape and broke a window in the financial district in my good trousers. I think we've established I can handle change. He looked at her for a moment, then he laughed. A real one. Not the polite, managed version he deployed socially, but the actual thing, which was shorter and less elegant and entirely his. She hadn't heard it in months, and the sound of it landed in her chest like something restored. Yeah, he said. I guess we have. She moved over. He got into bed. The lamp stayed on for a while. They talked about Marcus and the kids, about a patient of hers who had gone home that day after 3 weeks in her unit, about the apartment in the city that still had his name on the deed, and that they were now genuinely considering buying outright rather than treating as a temporary place. Small things, real things, the texture of a life that was not performance. Eventually, the lamp went off. In the dark, she said, I pushed that briefcase back across the table. I know, he said. I watched you do it. I want you to know I've thought about it, what it would have been like if I hadn't. She was quiet for a moment. If I'd taken the money and walked away. You didn't. But if I had. He was quiet. You would have been fine eventually, she said. You would have been hurt, and then you would have rebuilt, and you would have been fine. That's who you are. She paused. But I would not have been fine. Not because of the money, or the choice, or any of the practical things. Because every time I walked away from something that was mine, because someone decided I shouldn't have it, I lost a piece of myself that I had to work to get back. And I was running low. She held the dark. I pushed it back because I didn't have any more pieces to give them. He found her hand in the dark. That's the bravest thing you've ever told me, he said. It's not brave, she said. It's just true. Those are the same thing, he said. When it's hard. She thought about that for a moment. She thought about the marble table and the briefcase and Vittoria's assembled smile and the East dining room with the oil portraits and the chandelier. She thought about the fire escape and the rust on her palm, and Matteo's face when she walked through the door and he discovered that the variable he'd dismissed had arrived. She thought about Roman's mouth moving on the sidewalk outside Meridian Street. You came. She thought about the yellow flowers still in the vase on the counter that she had been replacing every week. That had become, without a formal decision, a standing thing. We're going to be okay, she said. Not a question. He squeezed her hand. Yeah, he said. We are. Outside the window, the city continued in its indifferent, magnificent persistence, lights and movement and the sound of other lives. The vast, ordinary hum of a world that didn't stop for anyone's crisis, that required you to find your way through your specific darkness and emerge from it carrying whatever you'd learned and get back up the next morning and make the coffee and answer the phone and go back to the work. She was good at the work. She had always been good at the work. And for the first time in 3 years, she was doing it beside someone who knew it, who had seen it, finally, in full, the fire escape and the rebar, and the steadiness under pressure, the quiet competence she'd been offering to everyone in her life except herself. Who had seen it, and who had stayed. She closed her eyes. The city moved outside. The yellow flowers stood in their vase in the kitchen, and the briefcase was gone from beside the door. Roman had given it to his lawyers as evidence, and it had gone into the chain of documentation that would slowly, over the following year, dismantle what Enzo and Matteo and Dario had tried to build. And the kitchen table was empty and clean and waiting for tomorrow's conversation, whatever it needed to be. The apartment was quiet, both of them breathing.